She stared at the bank statement, the numbers blurring through exhausted tears. 10 years. 10 years of saying no to herself. Was it
You are
worth
the
it?
most
Sarah
incredible
Chen
woman I
sat on
have
the edge
ever
of her
met.
narrow
Will you
bed in the
marry
tiny
me?
studio
Oh
apartment she
my
could
God,
barely
yes.
afford, staring
Yes.
at the crumpled paper in her hands. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows across the cramped space that served as her bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. 28 years old, working double shifts at Grace's diner 6 days a week, and still she could barely make rent. The walls pressed in around her. A single window looked out onto a brick wall so close she could touch it if she opened the glass. This was her life. This was all she had managed to build for herself after 10 years of working herself to exhaustion. But it was the envelope system on her refrigerator that told the real story. 5 white envelopes, each labeled in her careful handwriting: rent, groceries, emergency, utilities, savings. The first 4 were nearly empty. The 5th contained 3 $20 bills, folded and refolded so many times they felt soft as cloth. On the wall beside her bed, a hand-drawn chart tracked her progress over 120 months. A simple line graph, created with a ruler and a black pen, showing her savings trending slowly, painfully upward. Month after month, year after year, the line climbed, sometimes by $50, sometimes by just 10, but it always climbed. Sarah reached for her phone with fingers that trembled slightly from fatigue. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday night, late enough that she should be sleeping, but her mind refused to quiet. Tomorrow she would wake at 5, be at the diner by 6, and work until 3 in the afternoon. Then she would go home, sleep for a few hours, and return for the dinner shift from 6 until midnight, the same routine day after day, week after week. Sometimes she wondered if this was all life would ever be. An endless cycle of exhaustion, just barely keeping her head above water. The crumpled bank statement in her other hand caught her attention again. She had grabbed it from the pile of mail on her kitchen counter without really looking at it. Now something about the numbers nagged at her. The automatic transfer had gone through this month. $25 moved from checking to savings, the same as it had been for 10 years. But when was the last time she had actually looked at that savings account? Really looked at it? She couldn't remember. Maybe 2 years ago, maybe longer. The number on the statement seemed wrong somehow, too big. But the paper was wrinkled, and her eyes were tired, and maybe she was reading it incorrectly. She smoothed the statement out on her bedspread, trying to flatten the creases. The checking account balance was right there at the top, $217. That made sense. That was about what she expected after paying rent and buying groceries for the week. But below that, in smaller print, was another line: savings account balance as of statement date. And the number next to it made her heart skip. It had to be a mistake. She blinked hard, rubbing her eyes, then looked again. The number was still there. Sarah's hand started shaking. She set the statement down carefully on the bed and picked up her phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim apartment as she navigated to her bank's app. She logged in, her fingers clumsy on the screen, then found her way to the accounts page. Checking $217. Her thumb hovered over the savings account link. She was almost afraid to tap it, afraid the number on the statement was wrong, afraid it was right, afraid of what either answer might mean. She tapped. The screen loaded. Available balance: $47,322.18. Sarah's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the bed. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she had just seen. $47,000. That was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. She made $12 an hour plus tips. On a good week, she brought home maybe $400. On a bad week, closer to $300. She lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes choosing between groceries and keeping the heat on. There was no conceivable way her account contained $47,000. Her mind spun through possibilities. Someone had made a deposit error. Someone had put money into the wrong account. And if she didn't report it immediately, she could be accused of theft. She could be arrested. She could lose everything. The fear that gripped her chest was familiar. The fear of losing the little she had. The fear of making a mistake. The fear that had driven every decision she had made for the past 10 years. She retrieved her phone with shaking hands and stared at the number again, as if looking at it long enough might make it make sense. but it just sat there on the screen, impossible and terrifying. $47,322.18. She needed to call the bank, right now, before this turned into something she couldn't fix. Sarah found the customer service number on the bank's website and dialed with trembling fingers. Each ring felt like an eternity. Her heart pounded against her ribs so hard it hurt. The automated system answered with cheerful efficiency. "Thank you for calling Brooks Trust Bank. For account information, press 1. To report fraud, press 2. To speak with a representative, press 3. Sarah pressed 3, then pressed it again when the system asked her to confirm. "Please hold while we connect you to the next available representative. Your call is important to us." Soft music played in her ear. Sarah stood up from the bed and paced the small space between her bed and her kitchen counter. 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. Her reflection caught in the dark window glass, and she saw herself as if from the outside. A small woman in worn pajamas, hair tied back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes, pacing like a caged animal. This was who she was. This was what 10 years of grinding work had made her. Tired, scared, barely surviving. The music cut off abruptly. A voice answered. Male, warm, professional, but with something underneath that sounded almost human. Not the bored, scripted tone she usually heard from customer service representatives. This voice had texture to it, depth. "Premium Client Services, this is Daniel Wright speaking. How may I assist you this evening?" "Premium Client Services." Sarah almost laughed. There must have been some mistake in the phone routing, too. She wasn't a premium anything. "I need to report an error." The words came out rushed, her southern accent thickening the way it always did when she was nervous. Growing up in rural Georgia, she had worked hard to soften her drawl, but stress always brought it rushing back. "I just checked my balance and it says I have over $47,000. But that can't be right. I'm a waitress. I barely have enough to cover rent most months. Someone must have made a deposit error and I need to report it before there's legal trouble or something." There was a pause on the other end of the line. She heard the soft clicking of computer keys, rapid and precise. When the man spoke again, his voice carried a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. "Ms. Chen, I'm looking at your account right now, and I can assure you there's been no error. The balance is correct." Sarah's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the edge of her bed. "That's impossible," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I think you're looking at the wrong account. My name is Sarah Chen, account number ending in 4723. I work at Grace's Diner in Atlanta. I don't even know what a premium account is, let alone how I would qualify for one." More clicking, longer this time. She could almost hear him thinking through the phone line. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The professional warmth was still there, but underneath it was something sharper, more alert. This was not the voice of someone going through routine customer service motions. This was the voice of someone whose interest had been genuinely caught. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to ask you a few security questions to verify your identity, if that's all right. This is for your protection as much as ours." "Of course," Sarah said, though her hands continued to shake. He asked about her mother's maiden name, her first pet, the street she grew up on. She answered each question, her voice steadier now, focusing on the concrete details to keep from spiraling into panic. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. Your identity is confirmed." There was a pause, and when he continued, there was something else in his voice. Respect, perhaps. It seemed absurd, but Sarah could have sworn that's what she was hearing. "I'm going to be completely transparent with you about something that I find quite extraordinary." Sarah held her breath. "Looking at your account history, I can see that you've been making regular deposits for the past 10 years. Small amounts, usually between $25 and $200 per month. These deposits have been placed into a high-yield savings account, one of our premium products that typically requires a minimum balance of $25,000 to maintain." Sarah's mind reeled back 10 years. She was 18, raw with grief, standing in a funeral home that smelled like lilies and formaldehyde. The grief counselor had helped her with the paperwork, Social Security death benefits, a small life insurance policy her mother had through the hospital, $2,000 total. It was all her mother had left her. The counselor had helped her open a savings account, had helped her set up an automatic transfer. Just $25 from each paycheck, the counselor had said. You won't even notice it's gone. But over time, it adds up. Sarah had nodded, numb, and signed the papers. That was 10 years ago. I did set up automatic savings, Sarah said slowly, trying to piece together the puzzle. But it was only $25 at a time, sometimes a bit more when I had a good tip day. How could that possibly add up to $47,000 in 10 years? Compound interest, Ms. Chen. And now there was unmistakable admiration in his voice. Your account earns 6.8% annually, compounded monthly, over 10 years, with your consistent deposits, and never a single withdrawal. The growth has been substantial. But here's what I find truly remarkable, and forgive me if this is too personal, but looking at your employment and income information on file, you work as a waitress, is that correct? Yes, Sarah said, not sure where this was going. At Grace's Diner. I've been there since I was 18. And you've never once touched this money in 10 years. Even though, according to our records, you've had months where your checking account balance dropped below $20. There was something in his voice now that Sarah couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity exactly. It was more like wonder, as if she had done something he found genuinely impressive. Heat rose to Sarah's cheeks. She felt exposed, embarrassed that this stranger could see the full reality of her financial struggles laid bare in account records and transaction histories. I made a promise to myself, she said quietly. When I set it up, I told myself that money was for emergencies only. Real emergencies, like medical bills or losing my job. Not for regular expenses, no matter how tight things got. I thought if I could just leave it alone and let it grow, one day it might mean the difference between surviving and actually having a choice about my life. The silence that followed stretched out for several long seconds. Sarah wondered if she had said something wrong, revealed too much about how precarious her existence really was. But when the man spoke again, his voice was softer, more human than any customer service representative she had ever encountered. Ms. Chen, do you know what the average American your age has in savings? No, Sarah admitted. Less than $3,000. Most have significant debt. Credit cards, student loans, car payments. The fact that you have not only saved this amount but done so while living on a waitress's salary, never taking a single withdrawal even during what I can see were some very difficult months, that's remarkable. That shows a level of discipline and foresight that most people twice your age haven't developed. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of her savings as remarkable. It was just something she did, a promise she had made to herself and to her mother's memory, a way of honoring the sacrifice her mother had made, working double shifts as an ER nurse, wearing herself down to nothing, trying to give Sarah a better life. So the money is really mine? She asked, still not quite able to believe it. This isn't some kind of error that's going to be reversed tomorrow. It's absolutely yours, he confirmed. Every penny of it, earned through your own hard work and discipline. You are quite literally one of our model account holders. The bank actually uses accounts like yours in training materials to show the power of consistent saving and compound interest. Sarah laughed, a sound somewhere between disbelief and hysteria. I'm in training materials? Me? The waitress who sometimes eats instant noodles for dinner 3 nights in a row because I can't afford groceries until payday? You're the waitress who has built herself a financial foundation that most people only dream about, he corrected gently. And I have to ask, because I'm genuinely curious, what made you call to check your balance tonight? You haven't accessed this account in years. Sarah looked around her tiny apartment, at the water stains spreading across the ceiling that her landlord refused to fix, at the secondhand furniture she had bought piece by piece from thrift stores, at the single pair of work shoes sitting by the door, the sole worn so thin she could feel every pebble on the sidewalk. I needed new shoes, she said simply. Mine are falling apart. I've been wearing them with the sole coming loose, and my feet hurt at the end of every shift. I thought maybe I had enough in checking to buy a cheap pair, but I wanted to make sure I could cover my electric bill first. I called to check my checking account balance, but I must have looked at the wrong account on the statement. Another long pause. Then the man said something that surprised her. Ms. Chen, I'm going to say something that's probably not standard customer service protocol, but I think you should know. What you've accomplished here is genuinely impressive. I work with high net worth individuals all day. people with hundreds of thousands or millions in their accounts. And I can tell you that very few of them showed the kind of financial discipline at 28 that you have. The fact that you called tonight worried about an error rather than excited about found money tells me exactly what kind of person you are. I don't understand, Sarah said. Why does any of that matter to you? You're just a bank employee doing your job. There was a sound that might have been a small laugh. You're right, of course. I apologize for getting personal. But if I may make a suggestion, you mentioned needing shoes. You have $47,000 that you've been saving for a real emergency or for a choice about your life. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that taking care of basic needs, shoes, proper nutrition, perhaps living somewhere without water damage, maybe those aren't luxuries. Maybe those are reasonable uses for a portion of your savings. But what if something really bad happens? Sarah asked, the old fear rising up. What if I lose my job or get sick or, I don't know, my car breaks down beyond repair? I need this money for that. Ms. Chen, even if you spent $5,000 tomorrow on shoes, better housing, building up a proper wardrobe, getting your car serviced, you would still have over $42,000 in emergency savings. That's more than enough cushion for any reasonable emergency. And based on your history, I have no doubt you would rebuild any amount you spent through your continued savings discipline. Sarah's mind spun with the implications. $5,000. She could buy shoes, real ones, not the cheapest pair at the discount store. She could move to a better apartment, maybe one with actual heat and without water damage. She could stop eating instant noodles and actually buy fresh vegetables. She could get her car fixed properly instead of just patching it together with prayers and duct tape. The possibilities felt overwhelming, almost frightening in their scope. I need to think about this, she said finally. This is all too much to process right now. Of course, he said, his voice warm with understanding. Take all the time you need. And Ms. Chen, if you have any other questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to call back. My direct line is 5550147, extension 223. Thank you, Sarah said. Really, thank you for being so kind about all this. I thought I was calling to report fraud. I never expected this conversation. The pleasure was entirely mine, Ms. Chen. It's rare that I get to deliver genuinely good news. Sleep well, and remember, that money is yours. You earned every bit of it. After they said their goodbyes and Sarah hung up, she sat in stunned silence on her narrow bed, staring at the phone in her hands. $47,000. Hers, really, truly hers. Not a mistake, not fraud, but the result of 10 years of small, consistent choices to save instead of spend, to trust in a future she couldn't see, instead of focusing only on the present moment. She thought of her mother, who had died without ever knowing how profoundly her simple gift had impacted Sarah's life. $2,000 and a lesson about discipline. That's what Linda Chen had left her daughter. And now, 10 years later, Sarah had turned it into something substantial, something real. She opened her phone again and looked at the balance one more time, just to make sure it was real. The number was still there, still impossible, still true. For the first time in her adult life, she had the financial freedom to make decisions based on what she wanted, not just what she could barely afford. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She looked down at her worn shoes by the door and made a decision. Tomorrow, after her morning shift ended, she was going to buy herself a proper pair of shoes. Not the cheapest ones, not the ones on clearance, the ones that actually fit well and would support her feet through long shifts. It was a small thing, hardly revolutionary, but it felt like the beginning of something larger, the first step toward acknowledging that she deserved more than just survival. Across the city, in a corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that overlooked the Atlanta skyline, Daniel Wright sat at his desk long after he should have gone home. The call with Sarah Chen had ended 10 minutes ago, but he couldn't seem to move, couldn't seem to shake the sound of her voice from his mind. The executive floor was silent at this hour. His assistant had left at 6. The other executives had filtered out between 7 and 8, heading home to their families, their dinner parties, their carefully curated lives. Daniel stayed because there was nothing waiting for him at home except an empty penthouse and the view of a city that never felt like his, no matter how successful he became. He pulled up Sarah Chen's account again on his computer. The numbers told a story that fascinated him more than any multi-million-dollar investment deal he had analyzed in the past year. Initial deposit, $2,000, 10 years ago. Notation in the system, inheritance, Linda Chen. Then month after month like clockwork, the deposits, $25, 50. Sometimes 100 when she must have had a particularly good week. Sometimes only 10 when money must have been impossibly tight. But never, not once in 120 consecutive months, had she missed a deposit. And never, not once, had she taken a withdrawal. The account type was one of their premium high-yield savings products. Minimum balance requirement of $25,000. She never should have qualified for it in the first place. But some well-meaning bank employee 10 years ago had put an 18-year-old orphan into a product designed for their wealthiest clients, and no one had ever bothered to move her to a standard account, a bureaucratic oversight that had cost the bank nothing, and had given Sarah Chen an additional 2% annual return on her savings. That oversight had meant the difference between $20,000 and $47,000. Daniel did the math in his head. If she had continued this discipline, if she kept saving at the same rate, she would have over $100,000 by the time she was 35, over $200,000 by 40. She was building real wealth, penny by penny, through nothing but consistency and willpower. He had spent the day in meetings with investors who had inherited millions, who complained about their returns, who wanted more, always more, never satisfied. And then Sarah Chen had called, terrified that the money in her account was a mistake, worried she would be accused of theft for having too much. The contrast was stark, painful even. Daniel minimized her account and stared at his reflection in the darkened computer screen. 36 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Brooks Trust Bank, a position he had inherited when his father died suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago. Net worth of $850 million, most of it inherited, some of it earned through shrewd investments and careful management. On paper, he was a success. By any measure, he had made it. But he couldn't remember the last time he had felt the kind of pride in his accomplishments that he had heard in Sarah Chen's voice when she realized she had actually built something through her own effort. He picked up his phone and pulled up the employee schedule for premium client services. He wasn't supposed to be working that line tonight. He had staff for that. But once a quarter, he made a point of covering a few shifts himself. Usually the overnight shifts, the ones no one else wanted. It was important, he believed, for leadership to understand every level of the business, to remember what it was like to deal directly with customers, to hear their problems, to help solve them. Tonight had been one of those shifts. He had logged into the customer service system at 10 p.m., planning to field calls until midnight before heading home. In 2 hours, he had taken 11 calls. 10 were routine, balance inquiries, lost card reports, basic troubleshooting. The 11th call was Sarah Chen. Daniel stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that made up the far wall of his office. Atlanta spread out below him, a grid of lights stretching to the horizon. Somewhere down there was a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling. Somewhere down there was a woman who had just discovered she had built something worth $47,000 through nothing but discipline and hope. He wanted to know more about her, wanted to understand what drove that kind of consistency, wanted to see the face that went with that voice, southern accented and uncertain, but with steel underneath. The thought was unprofessional, inappropriate. She was a client. He was the CEO of her bank. There were boundaries, protocols, regulations about this kind of thing. But he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said, that she sometimes chose between heat and food, that she ate instant noodles 3 nights in a row, that she needed new shoes but was afraid to spend money on them, that she had kept a promise to herself and her dead mother for 10 years, even when it would have been so easy to break it. He pulled up her file again. Employment history was part of the information they kept on clients. Grace's Diner, 1247 5th Street, employed since age 18. Current position server. 5th Street. That wasn't far from here. Maybe a 20-minute drive. Daniel looked at his watch. 11:50 p.m. The diner would be closed now, but they probably opened early. Diners usually did. He could go tomorrow morning, just to see, just to put a face to the voice, just to understand in person what a person who saved $47,000 on a waitress's salary looked like. The idea took root in his mind and wouldn't let go. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and headed for the elevator. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. His Tesla sat in its reserved spot near the elevator, sleek and black, and worth more than Sarah Chen made in 3 years. Daniel sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He had everything, and he felt empty. She had almost nothing, and she had turned it into something through pure force of will. He wanted to understand that, needed to understand it. Tomorrow morning, he decided, he would go to Grace's diner tomorrow morning, not as the CEO of Brooks Trust Bank, just as Daniel, just as a man who wanted to meet someone remarkable. He started the car and drove home through empty streets, already counting the hours until dawn. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw numbers: $47,322.18. The number burned itself into her brain, impossible to forget, impossible to fully believe. At 4:30 a.m., she gave up on sleep entirely. She got up, made instant coffee, and sat at her tiny kitchen table with a notebook and pen. She needed to think this through logically, needed to make a plan. At the top of a blank page, she wrote, "What I could do." The list grew quickly. New shoes, not from the thrift store. $80, maybe $100 for really good ones. A better apartment without mold and water damage. That would be an extra $300 or $400 a month in rent. Fix the air conditioning in her car, broken for 2 years now. $600, the mechanic had quoted her. A doctor's appointment, because she hadn't been for a checkup in 5 years. $150 with insurance. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. Then in larger letters she wrote, "College classes." That had been the dream once, before her mother died, before survival became the only goal. Sarah had wanted to study business, maybe get a degree in restaurant management. She had fantasized about opening her own place someday, a diner like Grace's but hers, built with her own vision and values. 10 years ago, that dream had seemed impossible, laughable even. How could someone with $2,000 and no family support think about college? But now, with $47,000, Sarah did the math. Community college was affordable. She could take night classes, keep working full-time. It would take longer, but it was possible. It was actually possible. The realization brought tears to her eyes. For 10 years, she had been so focused on survival that she had forgotten about living, forgotten about dreams, forgotten that there might be a future beyond just making it through each day. The man on the phone had said something that stuck with her, that taking care of basic needs wasn't a luxury, that she deserved to use some of her savings to actually live. She looked at her list again. Everything on it, all of it together, would cost maybe $7,000 or $8,000. That would leave her with nearly $40,000 still saved. Still an enormous cushion. Still more than enough for real emergencies. Sarah made a decision. She would start small, shoes today, then maybe the doctor's appointment. Then, if she could work up the courage, she would look into community college courses for the fall semester. Small steps. That's how she had built the $47,000, $25 at a time, month after month. She could build a life the same way, one small choice at a time. By the time she needed to leave for work, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope that life could be more than just survival. She dressed in her work uniform, black pants and a white button-up shirt that had seen better days. She laced up her worn shoes, feeling every thin spot in the sole. But these were the last days she would have to wear shoes like this. Tomorrow, or maybe even tonight after her shift, she would go to a real shoe store and buy something proper. The thought made her smile as she locked her apartment door and headed down to catch the bus to work. Grace's diner sat on 5th Street like it had for 40 years, a beacon of consistency in a neighborhood that had seen its share of changes. The building itself was small, maybe 1,500 square feet, with a retro 1950s aesthetic that wasn't a design choice so much as original fixtures that had never been updated. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. A long formica counter with chrome-trimmed stools ran the length of the kitchen pass-through. Black and white checkered linoleum covered the floor, worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. A neon sign in the window blinked on at 5:30 a.m., announcing to the world that Grace's diner was open for business. Sarah came in through the back door at 5:45, tying her apron as she walked. The smell of coffee and bacon already filled the air. Grace Patterson stood at the grill, 70 years old and still moving with the efficiency of someone half her age. "Morning, baby girl," Grace called without turning around. "You're late!" "I'm 15 minutes early," Sarah protested, but she was smiling. "Early is on time is late, late is fired." It was Grace's standard joke, delivered with the same timing every morning. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always fresh, always hot, no matter what time you arrived. She leaned against the counter and watched Grace work the grill with the practiced ease of 4 decades of repetition. "Grace," Sarah said after a moment, Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything. Whether I answer is another question." "What would you do if you suddenly found out you had a lot of money saved?" Grace flipped 3 eggs in quick succession, not breaking a single yolk. "How much is a lot?" Sarah hesitated. The number still felt unreal. $47,000. Grace's spatula clattered onto the stainless steel counter. She turned, eyes wide. "Say that again." "I called the bank last night to check my balance. Turns out I've been saving for 10 years and I didn't realize how much it had grown. Compound interest. It's $47,000, Grace. 47,000. Grace set down her spatula carefully and walked around the counter. She pulled Sarah into a tight hug, the kind that Sarah's mother used to give her, the kind that made her feel safe and seen and loved. "Linda would be so proud of you," Grace whispered. "So proud, baby girl." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. There was work to do. Customers would be arriving soon. Grace pulled back, holding Sarah by the shoulders, studying her face. "So what are you going to do with it?" "I don't know. I've been saving for so long I don't know how to stop. Don't know how to let myself actually use it." "That money is meant to be used," Grace said firmly, "not hoarded. Your mama didn't leave you that seed money so you could die with a big bank account. She left it so you could build a life." I think I know, but it's scary." Grace squeezed her shoulders once more, then turned back to the grill. "Start small. Buy something you need. Something you've been putting off. Prove to yourself that the money is real, and the world won't end if you use some of it." "I'm going to buy shoes," Sarah said. "Today. After my shift." "Good," Grace said. "About time. I've been watching you walk on those cardboard inserts for 6 months now." They worked in comfortable silence after that, preparing for the morning rush. Sarah filled salt shakers, checked sugar packets, made sure the coffee station was fully stocked. The familiar routine was soothing. This was her world. These 4 walls, this checkerboard floor, these worn vinyl booths. This was where she belonged. At 6 a.m. exactly, Grace unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open. The regulars started trickling in almost immediately. Mr. Kim, 83 years old, Korean War veteran, arrived first as he did every morning. He sat in the same booth by the window, ordered the same breakfast. 2 eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast, black coffee. Sarah poured his coffee without asking, set it in front of him with a smile. "Morning, Mr. Kim." "Morning, Sarah girl. You look different today." "Different how?" "Happy. You look happy." Sarah laughed. "Maybe I am. Maybe today's a good day." More customers filtered in. Jenny, a single mother with 3 kids, working 2 jobs just like Sarah. Marcus, a construction worker with calloused hands and a dream of starting his own business someday. Rita and Tom, married 60 years, who still held hands across the table. These were her people, her community. The diner was more than just a workplace. It was family in the way that mattered, chosen and earned through years of showing up, caring, being present. Sarah moved through her routine, pouring coffee, taking orders, delivering plates. She knew everyone's usual order, everyone's story, everyone's struggles and hopes. Grace had taught her that. "Remember their names," Grace always said. "Remember what matters to them. Make them feel seen." At 6:15, the door chimed. Sarah glanced up automatically, ready to greet another regular. But the man who walked through the door was a stranger. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair starting to show gray at the temples. He wore khaki pants and a navy polo shirt. Expensive, but not ostentatious. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested wealth, education, a life lived far from places like this. But his eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the diner with what looked like genuine interest, not the slumming curiosity she sometimes saw from people who wandered in by accident. He stood in the doorway for a moment, seeming to take in the whole space, Then his eyes found Sarah behind the counter, and something in his expression shifted. She couldn't read it, couldn't name what she saw in his face, but something about the way he looked at her made her heart skip a beat. "Sit anywhere you like," she called out, falling back on the familiar script. "I'll be right with you." He nodded and made his way to the counter, sliding onto a stool directly in front of where she stood. Up close, she could see he was older than she had first thought. Mid to late 30s, maybe. Lines around his eyes that came from stress more than laughter. But a kind face, tired, but kind. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, already reaching for a mug. "Please," he said, "black." His voice hit her like a physical thing, warm, cultured, with an underlying texture that felt familiar somehow. Where had she heard that voice before? She poured the coffee, set it in front of him, and pulled out her order pad. "Do you know what you want, or do you need a minute?" "I need a minute," he said, picking up the laminated menu. "This is my first time here." "Well, welcome to Grace's," Sarah said with her practiced smile. "Everything's good, but the breakfast special is the best deal. 2 eggs, any style, bacon or sausage, toast, and hash browns for $7.95. "Sounds perfect," he said, setting down the menu without really reading it. "I'll take that. Eggs over medium, bacon, wheat toast." Sarah wrote it down, tore the slip from her pad, and clipped it to the order wheel for Grace. Then she turned back to the man, coffee pot in hand. "First time in the neighborhood?" she asked, making conversation the way she did with all customers. "You could say that," he replied. "I work downtown. Don't usually come this far out for breakfast." "Well, you picked a good place. Grace has been running this diner for 40 years. Best breakfast in Atlanta, if you ask the regulars." "I'm starting to see why." He took a sip of his coffee, then looked up at her with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You've worked here long?" 10 years, Sarah said. "Since I was 18. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Understanding? She couldn't tell. "That's impressive loyalty," he said. Sarah shrugged. "Or impressive lack of options. But honestly, I love it here. Grace is family. The regulars are family. It's home. Not everyone can say that about their workplace." "No," Sarah agreed. "I'm lucky." Grace called out that his order was up. Sarah grabbed the plate, set it in front of him with silverware rolled in a napkin. "Anything else you need?" "This is perfect," he said. "Thank you." Sarah moved down the counter to check on other customers, but she found her attention drawn back to the stranger. There was something about him that felt important, though she couldn't explain why. Something in the way he looked at her, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. And his voice, she knew that voice. Where had she heard it before? It wasn't until she was refilling his coffee, seeing his hand wrapped around the mug, that it hit her. Last night, the man on the phone, the customer service representative who had been so kind, so understanding. This was him. She was sure of it. But that didn't make sense. Why would a bank customer service representative be here, in her diner, the morning after their call? Unless he wasn't just a customer service representative. Unless he was something more. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she set down the coffee pot. The man looked up at her, and their eyes met. And in that moment, she knew that he knew that she knew. He had come here looking for her. This wasn't a coincidence. This was intentional. The question was why? And the bigger question, the one that made her heart race and her palms sweat, was what happened next. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the man sitting at her counter. The same warm voice from last night. The same careful way of speaking, as if every word was chosen with purpose. It couldn't be a coincidence. He had come here looking for her. The realization should have frightened her, should have felt invasive, inappropriate, maybe even dangerous. A stranger tracking her down based on a phone call. But instead, what she felt was curiosity. And something else, something she couldn't quite name, something that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks warm. He was looking at her now, and she saw the moment he understood that she had figured it out. His expression shifted, became more open, almost vulnerable, like someone who had been caught but was relieved not to have to keep pretending. Sarah glanced around the diner. The morning rush was building. Mr. Kim needed a coffee refill. Jenny was signaling for her check. Marcus wanted hot sauce. She had work to do. She couldn't just stand here staring at this man, trying to make sense of what his presence meant. She grabbed the coffee pot and moved down the counter, attending to the regulars with practiced efficiency. But her awareness never left the stranger. She felt his eyes following her as she moved, felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Grace called out from the kitchen, "Order up for table 4. Sarah delivered the plates, checked on the couple in booth 3, refilled water glasses. All the while, her mind raced. Who was he really? Why had he come? What did he want from her? When she finally made her way back to his end of the counter, he had finished his breakfast. The plate was clean, except for a small pool of egg yolk he had mopped up with his toast. He drank his coffee slowly, seemingly in no hurry to leave. Sarah pulled out her order pad, trying to keep her hands steady. "Can I get you anything else?" "Just the check," he said. Then, after a pause, "And maybe a conversation, if you have a minute." "I'm working," Sarah said, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "I can see that." He glanced around the diner, taking in the morning crowd. "What time is your shift over?" Sarah should have told him it was none of his business, should have maintained professional distance, should have done a dozen things other than what she actually did, which was answer honestly, 3 o'clock. "Would you consider letting me buy you coffee after your shift? Somewhere we could talk?" "We're talking now," Sarah pointed out. "Not really. Not with you working and me in your space." He met her eyes, and the sincerity in his gaze was almost painful to witness. "I owe you an explanation for showing up here, for not being entirely honest on the phone last night." "Not entirely honest," Sarah repeated. "That's one way to put it. It's the truth, and I'd like to tell you the whole truth, if you'll let me." Sarah tore his check from her pad and set it face down on the counter. She wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from whatever this was, whatever he was offering, but curiosity won out over caution. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks east, Brewster's. I'll be there at 3:15. Something like relief washed over his face. "Thank you. I'll be there." He pulled out his wallet and left 2 20s on top of the $8 check. Before Sarah could protest, he was already standing, already walking toward the door. "Wait," she called after him. "Your change." He turned back, and the smile he gave her was small but genuine. "Keep it. You earned it." Then he was gone, the door chiming behind him, and Sarah was left standing behind the counter with $40 in her hand and a dozen questions spinning through her mind. Grace appeared at her elbow, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who is that?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly, "but I think I'm about to find out." The rest of the morning shift crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through the motions, pouring coffee, taking orders, delivering plates, but her mind was elsewhere. Who was the man from the phone call? What did he want? And why did the thought of seeing him again make her feel nervous and excited in equal measure? At 2:45, she untied her apron and hung it on the hook in the back room. She caught her reflection in the small mirror by the time clock. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup. Her white shirt had a small coffee stain on the collar from when Mr. Kim's hand had shaken while she was refilling his cup. She looked exactly like what she was, a waitress at the end of a long shift. For a moment, she considered going home to change, but that felt like trying too hard, like pretending to be something she wasn't. If this man had sought her out based on a phone call about her bank account, then he already knew who she was, a working-class woman with $47,000 she had saved penny by penny. No point in pretending otherwise. Sarah grabbed her purse and headed out the back door. The afternoon sun was bright and warm. Spring in Atlanta, the air thick with humidity and the smell of flowers blooming in window boxes along the street. Brewster's coffee shop was exactly 2 blocks east, tucked between a dry cleaner and a convenience store. Sarah had passed it 1,000 times, but had never gone in. Coffee was cheaper at the diner, and Grace let her drink as much as she wanted for free. She pushed through the door and was hit by the smell of espresso and pastries. The space was small but carefully designed, with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and local art hanging in frames. The kind of place where coffee cost $5 instead of $2, where people sat with laptops and pretended to work while really just enjoying the atmosphere. He was already there, sitting at a small table near the window, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that should have felt awkward but somehow didn't. "I didn't know how you took your coffee," he said as she approached. "So I got one black and one with cream and sugar. You can choose." Sarah sat down across from him and pulled the black coffee toward her. "This is fine." He sat back down, wrapped his hands around his own cup. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched out, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "My name is Daniel Wright," he finally said. "And I wasn't entirely honest with you last night. I'm not just a customer service representative at Brooks Trust Bank. I'm the chief executive officer." Sarah had suspected something like this. The expensive clothes, the way he carried himself, the fact that he had somehow found her based on a phone call. But hearing it confirmed still sent a jolt through her system. "CEO," she repeated slowly. "So when I called last night, I was talking to the person who runs the entire bank." "Yes. Why would the CEO be answering customer service calls at 11:30 at night?" Daniel's expression became thoughtful, almost sad. "Because I believe leadership should understand every level of the business. Once a quarter, I cover a few shifts on the customer service line. Usually the late shifts, the ones no one else wants. It keeps me grounded, reminds me what the work actually is." "And my call just happened to come through while you were working?" "Yes, it was random. The system routes calls automatically. I had no way of knowing it would be you." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception. But all she saw was earnest honesty, maybe too much honesty, like a man who had been caught and was relieved to finally tell the truth. "But you came to the diner this morning," she said. "That wasn't random." "No," Daniel admitted. "That was intentional. After our conversation last night, I looked at your account history, saw 10 years of perfect discipline, saw someone who had built something real through nothing but consistency and willpower. And I wanted to meet you, to see the person behind that story." "That's creepy," Sarah said, though her tone was more curious than accusatory. "You do understand that's creepy, right? Looking up a customer's information and tracking them down." "I do," Daniel said. "And I apologize. It was inappropriate. But Sarah, I haven't been able to stop thinking about our conversation. About you. About what it means that you called worried about having too much money while I spend my days with people who complain they don't have enough millions." Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. "What do you want from me?" "I don't know," Daniel said, and the honesty in his voice was startling. "I don't have an agenda here. I'm not trying to sell you investment products. I'm not trying to recruit you for anything. I just wanted to meet you, to talk to you, to understand what drives someone with your level of dedication." "I'm not special," Sarah said. "I'm just someone who's been scared of being poor my whole life. The savings isn't noble, it's survival." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe you're not giving yourself enough credit." They sat in silence again, sipping their coffee. Sarah found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. The lines around his eyes, the expensive watch on his wrist that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, the way his shoulders carried tension. Like someone used to bearing weight. "Tell me about yourself," Daniel said. "Not the account history, the real story. Who is Sarah Chen?" Sarah wanted to deflect, to keep her walls up. But something about the way he asked, with genuine interest and no hint of judgment, made her want to answer. "I'm nobody interesting," she started. "Grew up in rural Georgia. My mom was an ER nurse. Dad left when I was 6. It was just the two of us." She paused, the old grief rising up like it always did when she talked about her mother. "She died when I was 18, heart attack at work. She was 42. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. And it didn't sound like empty platitude. It sounded like someone who understood loss. "She left me $2,000, life insurance through the hospital. That was it. That was my inheritance." Sarah stared into her coffee cup. "I was so angry at first. Angry that it wasn't more. That she hadn't planned better. That I was alone with nothing but $2,000 and a high school diploma." "But you used it wisely," Daniel said softly. "I made a promise," Sarah said, "to her memory, to myself, that I wouldn't waste what she gave me, that I would build on it, make it mean something." She looked up at him. 10 years later, here I am, still working at the same diner, still living in a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling, but I have $47,000 that nobody can take from me. "That's not nothing," Daniel said. "That's extraordinary." "Tell me about you," Sarah said, turning the conversation. "Who is Daniel Wright when he's not the CEO?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. I inherited the company when my father died 5 years ago. Heart attack, like your mother." He was 58. I was 31 and completely unprepared. He stared out the window at the street beyond. I've spent 5 years trying to fill his shoes, trying to be who everyone expects me to be, and somewhere along the way I forgot who I actually was. "What did you want to be?" Sarah asked. "Before you became the CEO?" Daniel laughed, but it was a sad sound. "I wanted to teach high school economics, help kids understand money, how to build wealth, how to avoid the traps. But my father had built this company. It needed someone to run it. I was the only child, so I did what was expected." "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes," Daniel admitted. "I'm good at what I do. The company has grown. We've helped a lot of people. But I can't remember the last time I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Not just making money for shareholders, actually mattering." Sarah understood that feeling more than she could express. 10 years of making coffee and delivering eggs. Important work in its own way. People needed to eat. But was it what she had dreamed of? No. They talked for 2 hours. The coffee shop emptied and refilled around them. They ordered more coffee, then tea, then water. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, touching on everything and nothing. Books they had read, movies they loved, the way Atlanta had changed over the years, their fears and hopes and the strange paths that had led them to this moment. At some point, Sarah realized she was enjoying herself, really enjoying herself, not performing, not being careful, just being. When she finally checked her watch, it was past 5:30. "I need to go," she said reluctantly. "I have the dinner shift at 6. "You work the dinner shift too?" Daniel asked. "You've been there since 6 this morning." "Double shift 6 days a week," Sarah confirmed. "That's how you save $47,000 on a waitress's salary." Something pained crossed Daniel's face. "Sarah, you don't have to work like that anymore. You have options now." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But I'm not ready to change everything just because I found out I have money. This is my life. I know how to do this." She stood, and Daniel stood with her. They walked to the door together, then paused on the sidewalk outside. "Can I see you again?" Daniel asked. Not as the CEO and the client, just as Daniel and Sarah, 2 people who had an interesting conversation and want to have more of them. Sarah knew she should say no. Knew this man came from a different world, a world where $47,000 was pocket change. Knew that whatever this was, it probably couldn't work. But she heard herself saying, "Okay, yes, I'd like that." The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise. "Tomorrow? Same time?" "I can't tomorrow, I work a double. But Thursday I have the afternoon off." "Thursday then," Daniel said. "I'll pick you up from the diner at 3? "Okay." They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave. Then Sarah forced herself to turn away, to walk back toward the diner, to return to her normal life. But as she walked, she found herself smiling, found herself thinking about Thursday, found herself wondering what it might be like to let someone in, even just a little bit. Behind her, Daniel watched until she disappeared around the corner. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a text to his assistant. "Clear my schedule Thursday afternoon. Something important came up." It was the first time in 5 years he had put his personal life ahead of work. It felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel became part of Sarah's routine. He showed up at the diner every morning at 6, sat at the same stool at the counter, ordered coffee and breakfast. He would work on his laptop between conversations, answering emails, reviewing documents. But mostly, he watched Sarah work. He watched the way she remembered every regular's order, the way she made Mr. Kim laugh with terrible jokes, the way she always seemed to know when someone needed their coffee refilled before they asked, the way she moved through the space with easy confidence, like someone who had found her place in the world even if it wasn't the place she had dreamed of. Grace watched him watching Sarah and kept her opinions to herself, but Sarah could feel Grace's knowing looks, the way her mentor smiled when Daniel left extra-large tips that Sarah always tried to refuse. On Thursday, Daniel took Sarah bowling. She was terrible at it, laughing every time she threw a gutter ball. He wasn't much better. They ate terrible nachos and drank cheap beer and talked about nothing important. It was the best date Sarah had been on in years, maybe ever. The next week, he took her to a park where they rented bikes and rode along the river trail. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had been on a bike. The freedom of it, the wind in her face, the way her legs burned with effort. It felt like being young again, like possibility. They went to matinee movies, splitting a bucket of popcorn in the dark. They went to a used bookstore where Sarah spent an hour browsing and left with 4 paperbacks that cost $3 each. Daniel offered to buy her more, but she refused. She had her budget. She wasn't ready to change it just because she had money in savings. Daniel never pushed, never suggested expensive restaurants or shows or anything that would make Sarah uncomfortable. He seemed content to exist in her world, to experience the small pleasures she had built her life around. But Sarah noticed things: the watch on his wrist that caught the light, the way people at the coffee shop seemed to recognize him, whispered to each other after he passed. The phone calls he took outside, his voice dropping to professional tones that were nothing like the warm way he spoke to her. And she noticed the car. He always arrived in an Uber or a taxi, claimed his car was in the shop. But once, when they were leaving the bookstore, she saw him standing next to a black Tesla in the parking lot, talking on the phone. He saw her looking and quickly ended his call, walked away from the car like it belonged to someone else. Sarah wanted to ask about these inconsistencies, wanted to understand who he really was beyond the careful image he presented. But she was also afraid of the answers, afraid that knowing the full truth would shatter whatever this was they were building. 3 weeks became a month. A month became 6 weeks. They fell into a pattern. Daniel at the diner every morning, dates twice a week on Sarah's days off. Long conversations about everything and nothing. She told him about her dreams of going back to school, maybe studying business. He encouraged her, suggested online classes she could take while still working. He told her about the pressures of running a company, the weight of other people's expectations. They didn't talk about money. By unspoken agreement, the subject of his wealth and her savings account remained off limits. In the spaces they created together, they were just 2 people trying to figure out if this thing between them was real. But reality has a way of intruding. Sarah was lying on her bed one evening, scrolling through her phone, when curiosity got the better of her. She typed Daniel Wright into the search bar. The results made her stomach drop. Daniel Wright, CEO of Brooks Trust Bank. Net worth estimated at $850 million. Recent acquisition of 3 regional banks expanded company footprint. Youngest CEO in company history, took over after father's death. Known for aggressive growth strategies and innovative banking products. There were photos. Daniel in a tuxedo at charity galas, standing next to women in designer gowns. Daniel on a stage accepting an award. Daniel shaking hands with city officials at a groundbreaking ceremony. Daniel testifying before a congressional committee about banking regulations. This was not the man who sat at her counter drinking coffee from a chipped mug. This was not the man who couldn't bowl to save his life and laughed at himself for it. This was someone else entirely. Someone who lived in a world Sarah couldn't even imagine. $850 million. Sarah felt sick. She set down her phone and stared at the ceiling of her tiny apartment. What was she doing? What did she think was happening here? Did she really believe a billionaire was interested in a waitress for any reason other than novelty? How long before he got bored and moved on to someone from his actual world? The next morning, Daniel showed up at the diner as usual. But everything felt different to Sarah now. She saw the expensive watch with new eyes, saw the way his clothes fit perfectly, custom-tailored, saw the phone that never stopped buzzing with messages he ignored to talk to her. She poured his coffee and took his order and kept her smile in place. But something had shifted inside her. The fantasy was over. Reality had arrived, and it was complicated and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. "You're quiet today," Daniel observed as she set his breakfast in front of him. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," Sarah lied. "Didn't sleep well." He studied her face like he didn't quite believe her, but he let it go. "We're still on for tomorrow, right? I was thinking we could try that new pizza place on 4th Street. "Actually," Sarah said, and the word came out harder than she intended. "I need to cancel. Something came up." "Oh," Daniel's face fell. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Just busy." But everything wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Something had changed. Some wall had gone up between them that hadn't been there before. Daniel finished his breakfast in silence. When he pulled out his wallet to pay, Sarah noticed the credit card. Black, premium, the kind reserved for people who spent money the way Sarah counted pennies. He left his usual generous tip and stood to go. But at the door, he turned back. "Sarah, whatever I did to upset you, I'm sorry. Can we talk about it?" You didn't do anything, Sarah said, but the words felt hollow. After he left, Grace materialized at Sarah's elbow. What was that about? I looked him up, Sarah admitted. Last night, I Googled him. And? And he's worth $850 million, Grace. He's not just successful, he's in a different stratosphere. And I've been pretending we're equals, pretending this could actually be something real. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Baby girl, money doesn't make him better than you, or different from you where it counts. Doesn't it, though? Sarah asked. He lives in a world where $47,000 is nothing, where my entire life savings is what he probably spends on a weekend vacation. How can that work? Only one way to find out, Grace said. Talk to him. Be honest. See if what you have is strong enough to survive the truth. But Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer to that question. That evening, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Daniel. I got your number from the diner's website. I'm sorry if that's overstepping, but I need to tell you something. Can we meet? Sarah stared at the text for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed and deleted 3 different responses. Finally, she settled on, tomorrow, coffee shop, 3 p.m. His response came immediately. I'll be there. Thank you. Sarah barely slept that night. She ran through a dozen possible conversations in her head. Ways to ask him why he had hidden his wealth. Ways to explain why it mattered. Ways to end things before they got too complicated. Ways to try to make it work despite the impossible gulf between their worlds. By the time she showed up at Brewster's the next afternoon, she was exhausted and anxious and ready for whatever came next. Daniel was already there, sitting at the same table where they had first talked. He looked tired too, like he also hadn't slept. When he saw her, he stood up, but he didn't try to hug her, just gestured to the chair across from him. Sarah sat down. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said, I should have told you from the beginning who I really am, what I'm worth. But I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd look at me differently. That you'd see the money instead of me. That I'd lose the one thing I've found in years that feels real. He leaned forward, his eyes intense on hers. Sarah, do you know what it's like to never know if people want you or want your bank account? To wonder if anyone would care about you if everything disappeared tomorrow? No, Sarah said honestly. I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be invisible. To have people look right through you because you're just the waitress bringing their coffee. To wonder if anyone sees past the uniform to the person underneath. I see you, Daniel said quietly. From that first phone call I saw you, and I didn't want that to change. Sarah wanted to stay angry, wanted to protect herself from the vulnerability of believing him. But she couldn't deny what she felt, the connection that had formed between them, the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked, the way he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the world. Why me? She asked. You could have anyone, someone from your world, someone who understands your life. Because everyone from my world wants something from me, Daniel said. Money, connections, status. But you? You called the bank worried about having too much. You tried to report your own $47,000 as fraud. You insisted on paying for your own books and movies. You're the least interested in my money of anyone I've ever met. That doesn't mean this can work, Sarah said. We're too different. Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe that's exactly why it can work. Because we each have something the other needs. You remind me how to be human, how to find joy in simple things, how to value what matters. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth. And maybe I can help you see that you deserve more than just survival, that using your savings to build a life isn't weakness, that you're worth investing in. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. I'm scared. I'm scared too, Daniel admitted, terrified. But I'm also happier with you than I've been in years, and that has to count for something. Sarah thought about the past 6 weeks, the laughter, the conversations, the way Daniel had fit himself into her world without trying to change it, the way he made her feel seen and valued and possible. Maybe Grace was right. Maybe the money didn't matter as much as she thought. Maybe what mattered was how they treated each other, how they showed up, how they made each other feel. Okay, Sarah said finally, but no more secrets. If we're going to try this, we have to be honest. About everything. Relief flooded Daniel's face. No more secrets, I promise. They talked for hours after that. Daniel told her about his life, the penthouse apartment downtown, the pressure from the board, the expectations from his late father's legacy, the loneliness of success that felt empty. Sarah told him about her fears, about feeling like she didn't belong in his world, about worrying that she would embarrass him, about the guilt she felt for even considering spending money on herself when people like Jenny at the diner were struggling to feed their kids. When they finally left the coffee shop, it was dark outside. Daniel walked her to the bus stop. "Let me drive you home," he offered. "No," Sarah said. "I take the bus. That's my life. I'm not ready to change it just because you're in it now." "Okay," Daniel said. "But can I ride with you? Make sure you get home safe." Sarah smiled despite herself. "You're going to ride the city bus?" "I've never actually ridden public transit in Atlanta," Daniel admitted. "Could be educational." They rode the bus together through the darkening city. Daniel asked questions about routes and schedules. Sarah pointed out landmarks, told stories about her regular commute. Other riders stared at the well-dressed man sitting next to the waitress, clearly out of place, but seemingly unbothered by it. At Sarah's stop, Daniel got off with her. They stood on the sidewalk outside her building, the moment stretching out between them. "Thank you for giving me another chance," Daniel said. "Thank you for being honest," Sarah replied. Daniel leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Sarah was smiling. "Same time Monday? I'll be at the diner at 6, Daniel confirmed. Sarah watched him walk to the corner to catch the bus back downtown. Then she climbed the stairs to her apartment, her heart feeling lighter than it had in days. Over the next month, they found their rhythm again. But now there was honesty between them. Daniel didn't hide his phone calls. Sarah didn't pretend not to notice his wealth. They talked about the differences in their worlds and looked for ways to bridge them. Daniel met Grace properly, sitting down with her after the breakfast rush one morning. Grace grilled him like a protective mother, asking direct questions about his intentions. Daniel answered everyone honestly. By the end of the conversation, Grace declared him decent enough for a rich boy. Sarah met Daniel's assistant, a competent woman named Margaret, who clearly ran his professional life. Margaret seemed surprised that Daniel was dating someone but professionally pleasant. They talked about the future, careful and tentative. Sarah shared her dream of maybe opening her own restaurant someday. Daniel talked about wanting to do more meaningful work, maybe starting a foundation focused on financial literacy. Everything felt possible, like they were building something real. And then Monica called. Monica Chen. No relation, despite the shared last name. Sarah's friend from high school, one of the few people who had stayed in touch after graduation. Monica worked in marketing at Brooks Trust Bank. Sarah hadn't even known that until Monica mentioned it casually a few months ago. Sarah's phone rang late on a Tuesday evening. She almost didn't answer, tired from a long shift. But Monica rarely called, usually just texted. "Hey, Mon," Sarah answered. "What's up?" "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something." Monica's voice was tense. "It's important. Can we meet?" "When?" "Tomorrow, coffee before your shift?" Sarah felt unease prickle down her spine. "Is everything okay?" "I'll explain tomorrow. Just please meet me, 5:30 at Brewster's." They hung up, and Sarah stared at her phone, wondering what could have Monica so worried. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop at 5:25. Monica was already there, a manila folder on the table in front of her. "Thanks for coming," Monica said as Sarah sat down. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. "What's going on?" Sarah asked. Monica slid the folder across the table. "I found something at work. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I think you need to know." Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a printed email and an attached document. She read the subject line, "High Potential Savings Account Holders, Investment Outreach Program." Her stomach sank. The email was from 3 months ago, before Daniel had walked into her diner, before they had started dating. The sender was Daniel Wright, CEO. Sarah read the content with growing horror. The email outlined a new initiative. Identify customers with exceptional savings discipline, but modest incomes. Target them for wealth management services, investment accounts, premium banking products. The idea was that these customers, with proper guidance, could become high-value clients. Attached was a list of 50 names. Sarah scrolled through them. Her name was there, third on the list, with notes next to it. 10 years consistent deposits, 0 withdrawals, high discipline score, target for wealth management outreach. The date on the document was 1 week before Sarah had called the bank that late Tuesday night. She read it again, trying to make it mean something different, trying to find an explanation that didn't lead to the obvious conclusion. But there was no other way to read it. Daniel had identified her as a target before they had ever spoken. He had known about her account, her discipline, her potential value as a customer before he answered her call. Everything that came after, the interest in her story, the visit to the diner, the dates, the declarations of falling for her. It was all part of a strategy, a plan to recruit a valuable customer. She was a mark, a target, a business opportunity. Sarah's hands shook as she set down the document. "There's more," Monica said quietly. She pulled out another sheet. "This is an email from 2 days after your call. Daniel canceled the program, said it was ethically problematic. But Sarah, the timing is suspicious. He identified you, then you called, then he showed up at your diner. Even if he canceled the program, he still came after you." Sarah couldn't breathe. The coffee shop felt too small, too hot, too close. "I thought you should know," Monica said. "I don't know what his intentions are. Maybe they changed. Maybe it started as business and became something else. But you deserve to know the truth." Sarah gathered up the papers with shaking hands and stuffed them back in the folder. "Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Sarah left the coffee shop and walked to the diner in a daze. She arrived 30 minutes early and sat in the back room, staring at the folder in her hands. At 6 a.m., Daniel walked through the front door right on schedule. He smiled when he saw her, started to walk toward his usual seat. Sarah watched him from the kitchen window, watched the man she had started to trust, started to care about, started to imagine a future with. And all she could think was that none of it was real. It had never been real. She was a name on a list, a target in a business strategy, a $47,000 opportunity dressed up as a love story. Grace came up beside her. "You okay, baby girl? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need you to serve him today," Sarah said, her voice flat. "I can't. Not right now." Grace studied her face, saw something there that made her not ask questions. "Okay, you take the back section. I'll handle the counter." Sarah worked her shift in mechanical silence. She took orders, delivered plates, refilled drinks, but her mind was elsewhere. With every customer she served, she was thinking about Daniel sitting at the counter, about the folder in her locker, about the evidence that everything she thought they had been building was a lie. At the end of her shift, she retrieved the folder and walked out the back door without saying goodbye to anyone. She had a decision to make: confront Daniel and demand the truth, or protect herself and walk away before she got hurt any worse. Either way, everything had changed. The fairy tale was over. Reality had arrived, and it was cold and cruel, and exactly what she should have expected all along. The folder felt like it weighed 100 pounds in Sarah's hands. She sat on her bed in her tiny apartment, staring at the printed pages spread out before her. The evidence of her stupidity, the proof that she had been right to be afraid, right to protect her heart, right to believe that fairy tales didn't happen to people like her. She had read the document so many times, the words were burned into her memory. High potential savings account holders. Investment outreach program. Her name, third on a list of 50 targets. Target for wealth management outreach. The date, 1 week before she had called the bank that Tuesday night. Daniel had known about her before they ever spoke, had identified her as valuable, as an opportunity. And then, by coincidence or design, he had answered her call, had shown up at her diner the next morning, had pursued her with what she now understood was professional calculation dressed up as romantic interest. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from Daniel. She had ignored 4 already today. "Sarah, please. I don't know what happened, but I can feel that something changed. Talk to me." She stared at the message. Part of her wanted to respond, wanted to hear his explanation, wanted him to somehow make this make sense in a way that didn't break her heart. But the larger part, the part that had learned at 18 that the world was cruel and unfair, the part that had spent 10 years building walls to protect herself, that part knew better. There was no explanation that could fix this, no words that could change the fundamental truth. She was a mark. He was running a con. End of story. Grace called. Sarah let it go to voicemail. She couldn't talk to Grace right now, couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in her mentor's voice. I told you to be careful, baby girl. I told you men like that don't date women like us for real. Another text from Daniel. Please, just tell me what I did wrong. Let me fix it. Sarah's hand shook as she typed a response. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Brewster's. 3 p.m. His reply came within seconds. I'll be there. Thank you. She set down her phone and lay back on her bed, staring at the water stains on her ceiling. The same stains that had been there when she moved in 10 years ago. The same small space. The same survival mode existence. She had let herself imagine something different, let herself believe she could have more, and now she would pay the price for that moment of weakness. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah moved through her morning shift at the diner like a ghost, taking orders, pouring coffee, delivering plates. But her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing what she would say, how she would confront him, whether she would give him a chance to explain or simply end it and walk away. Daniel didn't come to the diner that morning. His absence was conspicuous. The empty stool at the counter seemed to mock her. Even he knew something had changed. At 3 o'clock, Sarah pushed through the door of Brewster's coffee shop. Daniel was already there, sitting at their table. He looked terrible. His hair was uncombed. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Good, Sarah thought with bitter satisfaction. Let him suffer. He stood when he saw her, but she didn't move to hug him or even acknowledge the gesture. She simply sat down across from him and pulled the manila folder from her bag. I need you to explain something to me, she said, her voice flat and cold. Daniel's eyes went to the folder, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, fear, guilt. Where did you get that? He asked quietly. Does it matter? Sarah opened the folder and pulled out the first document. High Potential Savings Account Holders, Investment Outreach Program. Did you write this? Daniel's face had gone pale. Sarah, let me explain. Yes or no, did you write this memo? Yes, but... Sarah slapped the paper down on the table between them. Was my name on this list? Yes. The confirmation, even though she had known it was coming, still felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah pulled out the next page. This is dated 1 week before I called the bank. 1 week before you answered my call and suddenly became so interested in my story. 1 week before you showed up at my diner pretending you just happened to wander in. Sarah, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Daniel? Her voice rose, drawing looks from other customers. She didn't care. Tell me how I'm supposed to interpret this. You identified me as a valuable target. You knew my account details, my savings history, my potential as a client. And then what? You answered my call by chance? You came to my diner out of curiosity? Or was it all calculated, all part of the strategy? Daniel reached across the table like he wanted to take her hand. She pulled back sharply. Don't, she said. Don't touch me. Just explain. Daniel withdrew his hand and ran it through his hair, a gesture of frustration and pain. You're right. That memo exists. I wrote it. It was a program designed to identify customers with exceptional discipline and offer them premium services. And yes, your name was on that list. So everything was a lie from the beginning? No, Daniel said firmly. Sarah, look at the date on that memo. Then look at this. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. He scrolled to a message dated 2 days after the memo, then handed the phone to Sarah. She read the email. It was from Daniel to his senior management team. Subject: Cancellation of Investment Outreach Program. The body of the email was brief. After further consideration, I've decided to cancel the proposed investment outreach program outlined in my previous memo. Upon reflection, the approach feels ethically problematic. We would be using our position of power and access to customer information to target vulnerable individuals for sales purposes. This is not who we are as a company. The program is canceled effective immediately. Sarah stared at the date, 2 days after the original memo, 5 days before she had called the bank. I killed the program before we ever spoke, Daniel said. I wrote that memo, sent it out, then went home and couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about how wrong it was, how I was using my position to exploit customers. The next morning, I sent that cancellation email. But you still had my information, Sarah said. You still knew about my account. I did, and when you called that night, when I pulled up your account to help you, I saw your name, and I remembered it from the list. I remembered thinking, when I first saw your savings pattern, that you were remarkable, that whoever you had the kind of discipline most people never develop. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes intense on hers. Sarah, I swear to you, I had no idea you would call. The system routes calls randomly. It was pure chance that your call came to me. And when I heard your voice, when I heard you worried that you had too much money, worried about being accused of theft for having savings you earned, I was moved. Really, genuinely moved. So you came to find me the next day? Yes, I did, and that was inappropriate. I shouldn't have used your account information to locate you. I should have just let the call be a nice moment and moved on with my life. He paused. But I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your story, about meeting someone who reminded me why I got into banking in the first place, to help people build financial security, not to exploit them for profit. Sarah wanted to believe him. The evidence was right there in the email. He had canceled the program before they spoke, but doubt gnawed at her. Why didn't you tell me about this from the beginning? She asked. When you came to the diner, when we started dating, why didn't you mention that you'd identified me as a potential client? Because I knew how it would look, Daniel admitted. I knew you would assume the worst, that you would think I was playing you, using you, and I was terrified of losing you before we even had a chance. So you lied by omission? Yes, and that was wrong. I should have been honest from the start. Daniel's voice cracked. But Sarah, everything that happened after that first visit to the diner was real. The conversations, the dates, the way I feel about you. None of that was strategy or calculation. It was just me falling for someone who made me feel human again. Sarah stared at the documents spread across the table. The memo, the cancellation email, two pieces of evidence that told competing stories. On one hand, he had targeted her. On the other, he had changed his mind before they ever met. Which truth was more important? I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally. How do I know you're not just saying what I want to hear? How do I know this isn't all part of a longer con? You don't, Daniel said simply. Trust isn't something I can prove with documents or evidence. It's something built through time and consistency. But Sarah, ask yourself this. If I wanted to pitch you investment products, wouldn't I have done it by now? We've been dating for 2 months. Not once have I mentioned your savings or suggested you invest with the bank. He was right about that. He had never once tried to sell her anything, had never brought up finances except to encourage her to spend money on herself. Then why? Sarah asked. If this wasn't about business, what was it about? It was about wanting to meet someone remarkable, Daniel said. About being lonely and finding someone who saw past the CEO to the person underneath. About falling in love for the first time in my life in a way that felt real. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She would not cry, would not show that kind of vulnerability. I need time, she said. I need to think about all of this. How much time? I don't know. But Daniel, if we have any chance of getting past this, you have to promise me complete honesty from now on. No more omissions, no more secrets. Everything out in the open, no matter how uncomfortable. I promise, Daniel said immediately. Complete transparency, whatever you need. Sarah gathered up the documents and stuffed them back in the folder. She stood to leave. Sarah, Daniel called after her. Whatever you decide, I need you to know I love you, really love you. That's the truth, whether you believe it or not. Sarah walked out without responding. She couldn't give him the words he wanted. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She went home and called Grace, told her everything. The memo, the cancellation email, Daniel's explanation. What do you think? Sarah asked when she finished. Am I crazy to even consider believing him? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Baby girl, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I saw. I saw a man who showed up every morning at 6 a.m. for 2 months. I saw someone who was genuinely interested in you, not performing interest. I saw the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. But the memo... The memo tells me he had a bad idea and changed his mind before acting on it. That shows judgment. Shows he's capable of recognizing when he's wrong and correcting course. Grace paused. The question isn't whether he made a mistake. The question is whether he's the kind of man who learns from mistakes. And from what I've seen, he is. Sarah wanted to believe that, wanted to trust Grace's instincts, but fear held her back. That night, Exhausted and emotionally drained, Sarah fell into fitful sleep. When her phone rang at 6:30 the next morning, she woke disoriented and groggy. "Hello? Sarah, it's Monica. Have you seen the news?" Sarah's stomach dropped. "What news?" "Turn on Channel 7 or check any news website." "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I don't know how this happened." Sarah grabbed her laptop and pulled up a news site. The headline made her blood run cold. Brooks Trust Bank CEO accused of predatory customer targeting. Sarah Chen, the waitress, he allegedly pursued for profit. The article had everything: the memo, the list of 50 names, anonymous quotes from bank employees saying the program was designed to exploit vulnerable customers. And at the center of it all, Daniel and Sarah. Photos of them together, taken by someone with a telephoto lens, leaving the coffee shop, walking in the park, standing outside her apartment building. The narrative was devastating. Wealthy CEO identifies working-class woman as business opportunity, pursues her under false pretenses of romance, all to convert her $47,000 in savings into higher-margin investment products. Sarah felt sick. She scrolled through the article, seeing her life dissected for public consumption. Her mother's death mentioned, her years of poverty described, her savings account balance published for everyone to see. At the bottom of the article was a statement from Brooks Trust Bank. "We take these allegations seriously and are conducting a full internal review. CEO Daniel Wright has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Sarah's phone started ringing, unknown numbers. She let them go to voicemail. Within minutes, her voicemail was full. She checked the messages, reporters, all of them, wanting statements, interviews, her side of the story. She texted Grace, "Have you seen the news?" The response came immediately. "I'm looking at it now. Don't come to work today." There are reporters camped outside the diner. Sarah looked out her apartment window. 3 news vans were parked on the street below. Cameras and reporters clustered near her building entrance. She was trapped. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I don't know how this leaked. I'm trying to fix it. Please don't talk to reporters. Let my lawyers handle this." Another text. "I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but please believe me, I never wanted this. I would never expose you to this." Sarah turned off her phone. She couldn't deal with this right now. Couldn't process what was happening. For 3 days, Sarah stayed in her apartment. The reporters eventually got bored and left, but the damage was done. The story had gone viral. Conservative outlets painted her as a gold digger who had trapped a wealthy CEO. Liberal outlets painted her as a victim of predatory banking practices. Everyone had an opinion about her life, her choices, her relationship with Daniel. The comment sections were brutal. Thousands of strangers weighing in on whether she was a con artist or a victim, whether Daniel was a predator or a man in love. Her savings account balance became a topic of debate. Some people praised her discipline. Others mocked her for being proud of $47,000 when Daniel was worth hundreds of millions. Sarah felt violated, exposed. Every private moment, every vulnerable conversation, now public fodder for entertainment and judgment. Grace texted daily. The diner had been overwhelmed by reporters for the first 2 days. Business had actually increased, with people coming in hoping to see Sarah or learn gossip. Grace had thrown out 3 reporters who tried to bribe staff for information. Monica called, apologetic and horrified. "I didn't leak it, Sarah, I swear. I only showed you because I thought you had a right to know. Someone else must have found the memo." On the 4th day, Sarah's phone rang from a number she recognized. Daniel's direct line at the bank. She answered. "Hello?" "Sarah." His voice was rough, exhausted. "Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want?" "To explain what happened. To tell you the truth about who leaked that memo and why." "I'm listening." Daniel took a deep breath. "The leak came from inside the bank, one of my executives, Victoria Chen. She's the chief investment officer. 5 years ago, when my father died, the board had to choose between promoting Victoria to CEO or bringing me in. They chose me. She's been bitter about it ever since." "So this is about corporate revenge?" "Partly, but there's more." Daniel's voice tightened. "Victoria was the one who first suggested the investment outreach program. She pushed for it in meetings, said it was a growth opportunity. When I canceled it, she was furious, said I was being soft, leaving money on the table." Sarah absorbed this. "So when she found out about us, she saw an opportunity." "Yes, she leaked the memo to the press, painted it as my idea, my program, left out the cancellation, made it look like I was actively pursuing you as part of the strategy." But you did pursue me, Sarah pointed out. Maybe not for business reasons, but you did seek me out. I know. And I take full responsibility for that. But Sarah, Victoria manipulated the facts to create the worst possible narrative. She wanted to destroy me professionally and personally, and she used you to do it. Sarah was quiet, processing. What happens now? The board is investigating. They have all the emails, the timeline, the proof that I canceled the program before we met. Victoria will likely be fired, maybe prosecuted for leaking confidential customer information. He paused. But the damage is done. Your privacy has been violated. Your life has been exposed. And I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to touch you. It's too late for that, Sarah said. I can't leave my apartment without being photographed. I can't go to work. Strangers are commenting on my life, my choices, my worth as a person. My entire existence has become entertainment. Let me fix this, Daniel said urgently. I'll issue a statement. I'll hold a press conference. I'll take full responsibility and make it clear you were never part of any business strategy. And what will that do? Sarah asked. Make me look like the naive waitress who got played, or the opportunist who landed a billionaire? Either way, I lose. Then tell me what you want me to do. I'll do anything. Sarah thought about the past 2 months. The conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being seen and valued. Then she thought about the past 4 days. The violation of privacy, the judgment from strangers, the realization that his world and hers could never truly merge without consequences. I want to go back to my life, she said finally. The life I had before you walked into the diner, when I was invisible and safe and nobody cared about my $47,000. Sarah, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm protecting myself, something I should have done from the beginning. Is this really what you want? To walk away? To give up on us because other people have opinions? Your world destroyed mine, Sarah said, and her voice broke. I know it wasn't your fault. I know Victoria weaponized my life. But Daniel, I can't do this. I can't live in a fishbowl. I can't be the waitress who dated the billionaire. I just want to be Sarah Chen, a person nobody notices or cares about. I notice you, Daniel said quietly. I care about you. Doesn't that count for something? Maybe it would in a different world, but not in this one. Sarah hung up before he could respond. Then she turned off her phone again and lay down on her bed. She had protected her heart for 10 years. Built walls, kept people at a distance, trusted only in the security of money in a bank account. And then Daniel Wright had walked into her life and made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something more. She had been wrong. The world wasn't kind to people who dreamed beyond their station. It punished them for daring to imagine a different life. And Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way. 2 days later, there was a knock on Sarah's door. She ignored it at first, assuming it was another reporter. But the knocking persisted, gentle but insistent. Sarah, honey, it's Grace. Let me in. Sarah opened the door. Grace stood in the hallway, carrying a bag of groceries. You look terrible, Grace said, pushing past her into the apartment. When's the last time you ate? I don't know, yesterday maybe. Grace unpacked the groceries and started making food. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Simple diner food. The smell filled the small apartment, comforting and familiar. They sat at Sarah's tiny kitchen table and ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Grace said, You can't hide in here forever. I know. The reporters are gone. The story has moved on to the next scandal. It's safe to come back to work. I'm not sure I can face people, Sarah admitted. Everyone knows now. About my savings, about Daniel, about all of it. So what? Grace said. You think the regulars care? Mr. Kim told me yesterday that you're the most financially responsible person he knows, and anyone who says different is a fool. Jenny said she wishes she had your discipline. Marcus wants to know if you'll help him set up a savings plan for his business. Sarah felt tears well up. Really? Really? Your real community, the people who actually know you, they're proud of you. It's only the strangers, the ones who don't matter, who have negative things to say. Grace reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Baby girl, you can't let other people's opinions steal your life. You worked too hard to build something to let it be taken away by gossip and judgment. But what about Daniel? What about him? Grace, I don't know if I can trust him. Even if he's telling the truth about everything, even if his intentions were pure, his world is too different from mine. It caused this nightmare. What's to say it won't cause more? Grace was quiet for a moment. That's a fair question. And only you can decide if the risk is worth it. But Sarah, don't make decisions out of fear. Make them out of truth. What's true about how you feel about him? Sarah thought about Daniel, about the way he listened when she talked, the way he had fit into her world without trying to change it, the way he looked at her like she was the most interesting person he had ever met. I think I love him, she admitted, and that terrifies me. Love is terrifying, Grace said. Always has been, always will be. Question is, are you brave enough to try? Sarah didn't have an answer. That evening, Sarah finally turned her phone back on. It buzzed continuously as weeks' worth of messages and notifications downloaded. Most were from reporters or unknown numbers. But there were also messages from people she knew. Supportive texts from Monica, encouraging words from some of the other servers at the diner, and dozens of texts from Daniel. She read through them chronologically. The first few were explanations, apologies, pleas for her to call him back. Then they shifted. Updates on the investigation. Victoria had been fired. The board had issued a public statement clearing Daniel of wrongdoing and apologizing for the breach of customer privacy. Daniel himself had held a press conference where he took full responsibility for his poor judgment in seeking out Sarah, but made clear their relationship had never been about business. The most recent text was from earlier that day. I don't know if you're reading these. I don't know if you'll ever speak to me again. But I need you to know that meeting you, knowing you, falling in love with you, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even if it ends here, even if I never see you again, I'm grateful for the time we had. You reminded me how to be human. You reminded me what matters. I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. Sarah read the message 3 times. Then she opened her laptop and searched for news about Daniel and the bank. The story was everywhere. Daniel's press conference had been widely covered. He had looked terrible on camera, exhausted and emotional. But his words had been clear and unequivocal. Sarah Chen is one of the most impressive people I've ever met, he had said. She built financial security through discipline and sacrifice. She kept a promise to her late mother for 10 years. She treats everyone with kindness and respect. And yes, I fell in love with her. Not because of her account balance, not as part of any business strategy, but because she's remarkable. If she never speaks to me again, I'll understand. I violated her trust by not being completely honest from the beginning. But I need everyone watching to know that she did nothing wrong. She's the victim here, of my poor judgment, of corporate sabotage, of media exploitation. She deserves privacy and respect. I'm asking everyone to leave her alone and let her return to her life in peace. The comments on the video were mixed, but trending more sympathetic than before. People noted how genuinely devastated Daniel looked, how his voice broke when he talked about Sarah, how he took full responsibility without making excuses. Sarah closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of her apartment. She thought about Grace's question. What's true? True was that Daniel had made mistakes, had kept secrets, had sought her out inappropriately, had brought his complicated world crashing into her simple one. But also true was that he had changed his mind about the program before they met, that he had been honest when confronted, that he had tried to protect her when everything went public, that he had stood in front of cameras and taken responsibility, even when he could have blamed Victoria or the media or anyone else. And true was that she loved him, despite everything, despite the fear and the pain and the violation of her privacy. She loved him. The question Grace had asked echoed in her mind. Are you brave enough to try? Sarah had spent 10 years being careful, being cautious, protecting herself from risk. And what had it gotten her? Security, yes, but also loneliness, a life half-lived. Maybe it was time to be brave. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Daniel. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Brewster's. 3 p.m. His response came within seconds. I'll be there. Thank you for giving me another chance. Sarah set down her phone and took a deep breath. She didn't know what she would say tomorrow, didn't know if they could build something real from the wreckage of the past few weeks. But she knew she had to try. Because Grace was right. You couldn't let fear make your decisions. You had to choose based on what was true. And the truth was that Daniel Wright, for all his mistakes and complications, had seen her, really seen her. Not the waitress, not the account balance, not the $47,000, just Sarah, and that was worth fighting for. The next day, Sarah walked to Brewster's with her head high. A few people recognized her from the news coverage and stared. She ignored them. Let them look. Let them judge. She knew who she was, and that was enough. Daniel was already at their table. He looked better than he had on TV. Still tired, still carrying stress in his shoulders, but more present. When he saw her, hope and fear warred on his face. Sarah sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah said, "I need you to understand something. What happened? The media circus, the invasion of my privacy, that can never happen again. If we're going to try this, really try, you have to protect me from your world when necessary." "I will," Daniel promised. "I've already implemented new privacy protocols at the bank. And Sarah, I'll keep our relationship private if that's what you need. No public events, no photos, nothing that exposes you." "I don't want to hide," Sarah said, "but I need to feel safe. I need to know that when your world crashes into mine, you'll be there to help me handle it." "I will be, always." Sarah took a deep breath. "I also need complete honesty. About everything. No more secrets, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be." "Complete honesty," Daniel agreed. "I promise." "Okay," Sarah said. "Then here's my honesty. I'm terrified. Of your wealth, of your world, of the fact that people will always question my motives for being with you. But I'm also in love with you. And I think that's worth the risk. Worth the fear. Worth trying." Daniel's eyes shone with tears. "I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone." "Then let's try," Sarah said. "Slowly, carefully, building trust one day at a time." "One day at a time," Daniel repeated. "I can do that." They sat in the coffee shop and talked for hours. About boundaries, about expectations, about how to merge their two very different worlds. It wasn't easy. There were hard conversations about money, about public perception, about how to maintain Sarah's independence while building a partnership. But they talked through it all, honestly, openly, holding nothing back. By the time they left the coffee shop, something had shifted. They weren't starting over. They were starting new, building something stronger from the wreckage of what had come before. As they walked out into the late afternoon sun, Daniel reached for Sarah's hand. She took it, lacing their fingers together. They didn't know what came next. Didn't know if love would be enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. But they were willing to find out, together. Rebuilding trust was nothing like falling in love. Falling in love had been easy, natural, like two puzzle pieces sliding into place. Rebuilding trust was work. Deliberate, uncomfortable, sometimes painful work. Sarah and Daniel started slowly. Coffee once a week at Brewster's. Conversations that lasted hours. Digging into the hard questions. What did she need from him? What could he realistically provide? How did they navigate the vast difference in their worlds without one consuming the other? Daniel no longer came to the diner every morning. That had been Sarah's request. She needed her space to be hers again, needed to serve coffee and deliver eggs without feeling watched. Grace had agreed with the decision, though Sarah caught her mentor looking at the empty stool at the counter with something like disappointment. 2 weeks after their reconciliation, Daniel suggested something unexpected. "I think we should see a therapist," he said over coffee. "Together. Someone who can help us navigate this." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Therapy felt like admitting defeat, like their relationship was broken and needed fixing. But then she remembered her promise. Complete honesty. Real effort. If they were going to do this, they had to do it right. "Okay," she said, "but I choose the therapist. Someone in my price range, not some fancy practice that costs $500 an hour." Daniel started to protest, then stopped himself. "Fair enough. You choose." Sarah found Dr. Patricia Martinez through her insurance plan. $60 a session. Office in a modest building near the university. Dr. Martinez was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that put Sarah immediately at ease. Their first session was awkward. They sat on opposite ends of a worn couch, neither sure where to start. Dr. Martinez asked simple questions. How did they meet? What attracted them to each other? When did things start to feel difficult? By the end of the hour, Sarah was crying. Not from sadness, but from relief. Someone was finally listening to the whole story without judgment. Someone was helping them make sense of the mess. They went every week. Sometimes the sessions were hard, dredging up fears and insecurities neither wanted to face. Sarah had to confront her deep-rooted belief that she wasn't worthy of love, that anyone who claimed to care about her must have ulterior motives. Daniel had to face the ways his wealth had insulated him from real human connection, how he had used money as a substitute for vulnerability. Dr. Martinez gave them homework, small assignments designed to build trust incrementally. One week, Daniel had to share something from his life that made him feel vulnerable. He told Sarah about the night his father died, how he had been on a business trip and gotten the call at 2 in the morning, how he had never gotten to say goodbye, how he still dreamed sometimes that his father was alive and disappointed in the man Daniel had become. Another week, Sarah had to let Daniel help her with something without feeling guilty about it. Her car had been making a worrying noise for months. Daniel arranged for a mechanic to look at it, then covered the $800 repair bill. Sarah had wanted to refuse, to insist on paying him back, but that was the assignment. Let him help. Trust that generosity didn't always come with strings. It was hard, harder than Sarah had imagined, but slowly, incrementally, it was working. 3 months after the media scandal, Sarah made a decision. She enrolled in 2 online business courses at the community college. Daniel had been encouraging her for weeks, but Sarah had resisted. Using her savings still felt dangerous, like tempting fate. But one night, looking at her bank statement and seeing $51,000 accumulated through years of discipline, she realized something. The money was supposed to enable her life, not paralyze it. Her mother hadn't saved that initial $2,000 so Sarah could live in fear forever. She had saved it so Sarah could build something. The courses cost $1,200 for the semester. Sarah transferred the money from savings to checking, her hand only shaking a little. It felt like jumping off a cliff. It felt like freedom. She told Daniel about it at their next therapy session. His face lit up with genuine pride. "That's incredible, Sarah. What made you decide?" "I realized I was using my savings as a shield," Sarah admitted. "As long as I never touched the money, I could tell myself I was being responsible, but really I was just being scared." Dr. Martinez smiled. "Growth often requires us to act against our fear. You're doing brave work, Sarah." The courses were challenging but exhilarating. Introduction to Business Management and Small Business Finance. Sarah did homework at the diner during slow afternoon shifts. She studied at home late at night, her tiny apartment desk covered with textbooks and notes. For the first time in 10 years, she was working towards something bigger than just survival. Daniel offered to help with assignments, but Sarah refused. This was hers. She needed to prove to herself that she could do it on her own merits. Not because a billionaire boyfriend smoothed the path, but Daniel found other ways to support her. He brought her coffee during study sessions. He listened when she was frustrated with difficult concepts. He celebrated when she aced her first exam, taking her to a modest Italian restaurant that she had picked, not some expensive place that would make her uncomfortable. They were learning each other's love languages. Sarah expressed care through actions and quality time. Daniel expressed it through service and encouragement. Neither was right or wrong. They were just different. And slowly, they were learning to speak each other's dialects. 4 months in, Grace pulled Sarah aside after the breakfast rush. "You seem different lately," Grace observed. "Lighter, maybe? Less scared." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "Like I'm finally living instead of just surviving." Grace studied her face with those knowing eyes that saw everything. "He's good for you." "I was wrong to doubt him." "You weren't wrong to protect me," Sarah said. "You were being a good mentor, a good mother." The word hung in the air between them. Grace had never had children of her own. Sarah had lost her mother at 18. They had found each other in grief and built something that looked like family. "Your mama would be proud of you," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "Taking those classes, building something, letting yourself love someone, she'd be so proud." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish she could have met him." "She knows," Grace said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows. And she's happy for you." That night, Sarah allowed herself to imagine something she had never let herself consider before. A future. Not just survival, not just getting through each day, but an actual future with plans and dreams and possibilities. She imagined finishing her degree, maybe taking more advanced courses. She imagined someday, maybe, opening a small restaurant of her own. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place like Grace's. Somewhere people could come and feel seen, feel cared for, feel at home. And in that imagined future, Daniel was there. Not fixing her problems or funding her dreams, just there. A partner. Someone to share the victories and failures with. It was terrifying how much she wanted it. At their next therapy session, Dr. Martinez asked a question that changed everything. Sarah, what's your biggest fear about this relationship? Sarah didn't have to think about the answer. It rose up immediately, visceral and terrifying. That I'll lose myself. That his world is so big and my world is so small that I'll get swallowed up. That one day I'll look in the mirror and not recognize the person looking back. Dr. Martinez nodded. That's a valid fear. Daniel, how do you respond to that? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and sincere. I don't want you to change. I fell in love with the woman who serves coffee at Grace's diner and saves every penny and treats everyone with kindness. If you became someone else, someone who fit perfectly into my world, I think I'd mourn the loss of who you are. But your world has expectations, Sarah said. If we stay together, eventually I'll have to meet those expectations. Go to events, meet important people, present a certain image. Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe I change my world to fit you, instead of asking you to change for my world. Sarah stared at him. What does that mean? It means I've been thinking a lot about what actually matters to me. The company, the social obligations, the performance of being Daniel Wright CEO, versus the life I actually want to live. Time with people who matter, work that feels meaningful, building something real instead of just accumulating more wealth I don't need. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Daniel, it sounds like you're considering significant changes. Can you say more about that? Daniel turned to Sarah, speaking directly to her. I hired a co-CEO, someone to share the operational responsibilities of the bank. It's not common, but it's not unheard of. I'll still be involved in major decisions, but I won't be carrying the whole weight alone anymore. Sarah's eyes widened. When did you do this? Last month, after one of our sessions, when you talked about needing to know that I could make space in my life for us. I realized you were right. I couldn't keep working 80-hour weeks and expect to build a real relationship. Something had to change. You did that for us? I did it for me, Daniel corrected. For the life I want to have. You just helped me realize what that life could look like. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the grand romantic gesture of a man trying to win her over. This was the practical decision of a partner building a sustainable life. It was less flashy than flowers or expensive gifts. It was also more meaningful than anything he could have bought. 5 months after the media scandal, Sarah got her midterm grades. She had earned an A in Introduction to Business Management and a B+ in Small Business Finance. She stared at the grades on her computer screen, hardly believing they were real. She called Daniel immediately. I did it. I got good grades, real grades based on actual work, not because anyone helped me. The joy in his voice was unfiltered. That's amazing! Sarah, I'm so proud of you. We should celebrate. They went to the same Italian restaurant, the one with red and white checkered tablecloths and breadsticks that came free with the meal. Daniel ordered wine, and Sarah let herself drink a whole glass without worrying about the cost. They toasted to her grades, to hard work, to the future. I've been thinking, Sarah said over dessert, about what comes after these classes. And I want to keep going, get my associate's degree. Maybe even transfer to a 4-year school eventually. She paused, the old fear trying to reassert itself. It'll take years and money, but I think I want to try. Then you should try, Daniel said simply. And Sarah, I know you want to pay for it yourself. I respect that. But if you ever need help, if there's a semester where the money is tight, or you need books or anything else, I hope you know you can ask. I might not ask, Sarah said honestly. I know, but the offer stands. Always. 6 months in, Daniel took Sarah to meet his mother properly. Not the awkward first introduction that had happened before, when everything was new and uncertain. This time Sarah was prepared. This time they were solid. Patricia Wright lived in a sprawling estate in Buckhead, the kind of house that made Sarah's studio apartment seem even smaller by comparison. But Sarah walked in with her head high, wearing a simple dress she had bought for the occasion. Not designer, not expensive, but clean and appropriate, and authentically her. Patricia was waiting in a sitting room that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary to furnish. She studied Sarah with cool, assessing eyes. So, you're the waitress who's captured my son's attention. I'm Sarah Chen, Sarah said, refusing to be reduced to her job title. And yes, I'm dating your son. Something flickered in Patricia's expression. Approval, maybe. Or at least respect for Sarah's backbone. They had tea. Actual tea. Served in china cups on silver trays by staff who moved like ghosts. Sarah was careful with the delicate cup, hyper-aware that it probably cost more than she made in a week. But she didn't let the setting intimidate her. Patricia asked questions about Sarah's family, her education, her plans for the future. The questions were pointed, but not unkind. A mother protecting her son, which Sarah could understand even if it stung. "My son tells me you're taking business courses," Patricia said. "Yes, ma'am, I'm working toward my degree, while working full-time as a waitress." "Yes, ma'am." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "I worked my way through college as a secretary. My father was a factory worker. My mother cleaned houses. I know what it's like to build something from nothing." Sarah looked at her with new eyes. "I didn't know that. Most people don't. After I married Daniel's father, I became Mrs. Wright. My history disappeared." Patricia set down her teacup. "My son has dated many women, beautiful women, well-educated women, women who fit perfectly into this world. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. How does he look at me? Like you're real, like you matter." Patricia's expression softened. "Don't let my world change you, Sarah. Hold on to who you are. That's what he needs. What we all need, really. Someone to remind us that there's more to life than what we own." By the time Sarah left, she and Patricia weren't friends, but they had reached an understanding, and that was enough. 7 months in, Sarah had saved enough in tips and leftover financial aid to do something she had been considering for weeks. She went to a jewelry store, a modest one in a strip mall, and bought a watch. Not expensive by Daniel's standards. $200, which felt extravagant to Sarah. But it was a nice watch, with a leather band and a simple face. She gave it to Daniel at their next coffee date. "What's this for?" he asked. Surprise." "You gave me so much," Sarah said. "Time, patience, understanding. I wanted to give you something tangible, something that shows I'm invested in this too." Daniel opened the box and stared at the watch. His eyes were suspiciously bright. "Sarah, this is too much. It's a watch, not a car. You'll survive." He took off his expensive Patek Philippe and replaced it with Sarah's gift. The cheaper watch looked out of place on his wrist, but he wore it with evident pride. "I love it," he said. "I'll wear it every day." "You don't have to do that. I want to." And he did. Daniel wore Sarah's watch to business meetings, to family dinners, to every session of couples therapy. When people asked about it, about why the CEO of a major bank wore a $200 watch, he told them it was a gift from someone important. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. 8 months after the scandal, Dr. Martinez announced that she thought they were ready to graduate from couples therapy. "You've both done remarkable work," she said in their final session. "You've built communication skills, established boundaries, learned to trust each other. I'm not saying you'll never have problems. All couples have problems. But you now have the tools to work through them." "So we're fixed?" Sarah asked with a small smile. "You were never broken," Dr. Martinez said. "You were two people learning to build something together. And you've done it. Be proud of that." After the session, Daniel and Sarah walked to the park where they had gone on one of their early dates. They sat on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks paddled lazily in the fading afternoon light. 8 months, Sarah said. "Feels like longer." "Feels like no time at all," Daniel said. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after two people have done the hard work of really knowing each other. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said. "I got my grades for this semester. I got straight A's." Daniel turned to her, his face bright with pride. "Sarah, that's incredible. It means I qualified for a scholarship for next semester. A partial scholarship, but still. They're paying me to go to school." She laughed, the sound filled with wonder. "Me, the waitress from rural Georgia. I earned a scholarship." Of course you did. You're brilliant." "I'm not brilliant. I'm just finally using the brain my mother gave me." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing I could do this before I believed it myself." 9 months in, Grace made an announcement at the diner. She was cutting back her hours. Her arthritis had been getting worse, and standing on her feet all day was becoming too difficult. She needed someone to take over more of the operational responsibilities. She wanted Sarah to become assistant manager. The pay's not much more, Grace admitted, but it's more responsibility, more say in how things run. And it's a step toward what you want, isn't it? Experience managing a restaurant? Sarah accepted immediately. The new position came with a modest raise and actual management experience. It would look good on a resume. More importantly, it was Grace trusting her with something that mattered. Sarah threw herself into the work. She created more efficient schedules for the servers. She negotiated better prices with suppliers. She implemented a new inventory system that reduced waste. The diner's profit margins improved. Grace beamed with pride. "You're a natural at this," Grace said one afternoon. "You've got the touch, the ability to make people feel valued while still getting things done. That's rare." "I learned from the best," Sarah said. "Damn right you did." 10 months in, Daniel invited Sarah to move in with him. They were at dinner, the Italian place that had become their spot, when he brought it up. "I know it's a big step," he said, "and I know you value your independence. But Sarah, we're together most nights anyway. And honestly, your apartment is falling apart. The landlord still hasn't fixed the water damage. You deserve better." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Moving in together felt like giving up her last bastion of independence. Her apartment was small and old and imperfect, but it was hers. The first place she had ever lived that was truly her own. "I need to think about it," she said. Daniel nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah thought about it for 2 weeks. She talked to Grace, who told her to trust her gut. She talked to Dr. Martinez in an individual session, exploring what the decision meant for her sense of self. She made a list of pros and cons on the back of an order pad during a slow afternoon shift. In the end, what decided her was something Daniel said in passing. "If you move in, I want you to know it doesn't change anything fundamental about us. You'll still work at the diner. You'll still save money. You'll still be Sarah Chen, assistant manager and college student. You'll just be Sarah Chen who lives with her boyfriend instead of Sarah Chen who lives alone." The simplicity of it settled something in her chest. "Okay," she told him at their next coffee date. "I'll move in, but I pay rent." "Sarah." "I pay rent," she repeated firmly. "Not market rate because I can't afford that, but something. $500 a month. It's more than I'm paying now and it's fair." Daniel wanted to argue. She could see it in his face, but he had learned, over the past 10 months, when to push and when to accept her boundaries. $500 a month, he agreed. "And you're in charge of groceries. I've been living off takeout for years. Having actual food in the house would be nice." They shook on it, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. She was doing this, moving in with someone, taking a risk, building a life. The move itself took one afternoon. Sarah didn't have much. Her clothes fit in 3 boxes, her books in 2 more. Some kitchen supplies, her laptop, a few sentimental items. 10 years of life packed into Daniel's Tesla in a single trip. Daniel's penthouse was overwhelming at first. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the entire city. A kitchen with appliances Sarah didn't know how to use. A bathroom larger than her old studio. But Daniel had cleared space for her things. Drawer space, closet space, a section of shelves for her books. "I want this to feel like your home," he said. "Not just my home that you're living in." Over the following weeks, Sarah gradually made the space her own. She bought plants from a nursery, affordable greenery that softened the stark modern aesthetic. She put family photos on the nightstand. She rearranged the kitchen to make sense for someone who actually cooked. Slowly, the space became theirs instead of his. 11 months after the scandal, Sarah was working an afternoon shift at the diner when a woman walked in. She was elegantly dressed, clearly out of place among the construction workers and elderly regulars. She took a seat at the counter, and Sarah approached with her order pad ready. "Coffee to start?" Sarah asked. "Yes, please, black." The woman studied Sarah's face. "You're Sarah Chen." It wasn't a question. Sarah felt her guard go up immediately. "Can I help you with something? My name is Margaret Hartwell. I was wondering if we could talk." The name meant nothing to Sarah. "I'm working right now. If you need to discuss something, you can call later." "It's about my family," Margaret said, "and about Daniel Wright." Sarah's stomach dropped. She glanced at Grace, who nodded permission. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and led Margaret to a booth in the back corner. "What's this about?" Sarah asked. Margaret took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "My husband was William Hartwell. He owned Hartwell Manufacturing. The name clicked. Sarah remembered from the research she had done months ago, reading about Daniel's business history. Hartwell Manufacturing was one of the companies Brooks Capital had acquired, one of the deals that critics had called ruthless. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," Sarah said. "I came to apologize," Margaret said, "for what happened to you, the media scandal. My niece, Victoria Chen, was the one who leaked that information. She's William's sister's daughter. She blamed Daniel for my husband's business failing. She wanted revenge." Sarah processed this. "Victoria is your niece?" "Yes, and I'm horrified by what she did. To you, to Daniel, to everyone involved." Margaret's eyes were sincere, pained. "She made it seem like the acquisition destroyed our family, but the truth is more complicated." "How so?" Margaret sighed. "William was a proud man. Too proud. He refused to modernize the factory, refused to adapt to changing markets. By the time Brooks Capital acquired the company, we were drowning in debt. Daniel tried to save it. He invested capital, brought in consultants, offered solutions. But William saw it as interference, as an outsider telling him how to run his family business." "What happened?" "The factory closed. William was devastated. He started drinking. Our son James watched his father spiral and started drinking too." Margaret's voice broke. "James got a DUI, lost his license, kept drinking anyway. And one night, he got behind the wheel drunk and caused an accident." Sarah's blood went cold. She knew what came next. "I'm so sorry about your parents," Margaret said. "Sarah, I know nothing I say can change what happened, but I need you to know that Daniel wasn't responsible for that tragedy. My husband's pride destroyed our family. My son's addiction killed your parents. Daniel was just a businessman trying to save a failing company." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She had never blamed Daniel for her parents' death, had never even made the connection until Margaret spelled it out. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the full story from someone who had lived through it, broke something open inside her. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because you deserve the truth. Because Victoria weaponized my family's tragedy to hurt you, and that's not fair." Margaret reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "And because I've been watching the news. I've seen how Daniel looks at you. My William never looked at me that way, even in our best years. What you two have, it's real. Don't let my family's dysfunction destroy it." Margaret left after finishing her coffee. She left a $100 bill for the $8 tab. And when Sarah tried to refuse it, Margaret said it was for the years of pain the Hartwell family had caused. That night, Sarah told Daniel about the conversation. He listened in silence, his face grave. "I didn't know she was going to reach out to you," he said. "Are you okay?" "I think so." Sarah curled up next to him on the couch. It was hard to hear, but also helpful, to understand the full picture. "I should have told you about Hartwell Manufacturing earlier. Should have connected the dots when I learned about your parents." "You didn't know," Sarah said. "Neither of us knew until Victoria made it public. And Daniel, I never blamed you, not really. I know you didn't cause the accident. That was James Hartwell's choice, his addiction, his actions." Daniel wrapped his arms around her. "I'm still sorry. Sorry that you lost them. Sorry that my business history got tangled up in your personal tragedy." They sat together in the darkening apartment, holding each other, processing the weight of the past. 1 year after the scandal, almost to the day, Sarah got an unexpected phone call. It was a producer from a major morning show. They wanted to do a story about financial literacy, about how discipline and consistency could build real wealth even on a modest income. They wanted to interview Sarah. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. The media had already invaded her privacy once. She had no desire to open that door again. But then the producer said something that changed her mind. "We're not interested in the relationship drama. That's old news. We want to focus on your story. How you saved $47,000 on a waitress's salary. How you're now in school working toward a degree. You're an example of what's possible when you commit to building something over time. A lot of people could benefit from hearing that." Sarah thought about it, talked to Daniel, to Grace, to her academic advisor. Everyone agreed it could be a positive opportunity. A chance to control the narrative, to share something meaningful instead of being defined by scandal. She agreed to the interview. The segment aired 3 weeks later. Sarah sat on a studio couch facing a sympathetic host and told her story. Not the romance part. The part about her mother leaving her $2,000. About setting up automatic savings. About never touching the money for 10 years while living paycheck to paycheck. About finally using some of it to invest in her education. The host asked good questions. How did she maintain the discipline? What advice would she give to others? What had she learned? Sarah answered honestly. The discipline came from fear, from knowing what it felt like to have nothing. But it had become something more than fear over time. It had become self-respect, pride in what she was building, proof that she could keep a promise to herself. The segment went viral. Sarah's phone exploded with messages. Morning show appearances were requested. Financial websites wanted to interview her. Her story became an example in personal finance communities across the internet. But this time the attention felt different. People weren't judging her relationship or questioning her motives. They were inspired by her story, thanking her for showing what was possible, asking for advice on starting their own savings journeys. Sarah found herself becoming an unlikely advocate for financial literacy. She started a blog, writing about her experiences with saving, budgeting, going back to school while working full-time. The blog grew slowly but steadily. People connected with her voice, her honesty, her refusal to pretend the journey was easy. Daniel watched all of this with quiet pride. He didn't insert himself into her growing platform, didn't use his connections to amplify her reach, just supported her from the sidelines, celebrating each milestone. This was her thing, her accomplishment, her voice, and that made it all the more meaningful. 14 months after the scandal, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Daniel asked Sarah to take a walk with him. They often walked together in the evenings, exploring the city, talking about their days. But tonight felt different. Daniel seemed nervous, distracted. They ended up at the park where they had gone on their second date, the same bench overlooking the pond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel took her hand. I want to ask you something. Sarah's heart started to pound. She had a sudden, overwhelming certainty about what was coming. Sarah Chen, Daniel said, and his voice was shaking. You saved my life. Not just the day you answered my phone call, though you did that too. You saved me from living a hollow existence where nothing felt real. You taught me how to be human again, how to value what matters, how to build something meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth. He pulled a small box from his pocket. I'm not asking you to become someone different. I'm not asking you to fit into my world or give up yours. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, a real life, one where we both keep growing and challenging each other and becoming better versions of ourselves. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a small diamond, not ostentatious, not trying to prove anything, just beautiful. Will you marry me? Sarah looked at the ring, then at Daniel's face, saw the vulnerability there, the hope and fear mixed together, saw a man who had learned how to be honest, how to be present, how to do the work that real love required. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Daniel slipped the ring on her finger. They kissed as the sun set over the city, two people who had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances and built something real from the wreckage. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. I love you, Daniel said. I love you too, Sarah replied. Now take me home and let's tell Grace. She's going to lose her mind. They walked back to the car hand in hand, ready to start the next chapter of their story together. Grace did, in fact, lose her mind. Sarah and Daniel drove straight from the park to the diner. It was almost closing time, just a few stragglers finishing their coffee. Grace was wiping down the counter when they walked in, and she took one look at Sarah's face and knew. Oh, baby girl, Grace breathed. He did it. He finally did it. Sarah held up her hand, showing the ring. Grace grabbed it, examined the diamond in the harsh fluorescent light, then pulled Sarah into a crushing hug. I'm so happy for you, Grace whispered. Your mama would be dancing right now, dancing and crying and so proud. Daniel hung back, giving them their moment. But Grace pulled him into the embrace too, the three of them standing in the middle of the diner like a small island of joy. You better take care of her, Grace said to Daniel, her voice fierce. Every day for the rest of my life, Daniel promised. Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes with her apron. When's the wedding? Sarah and Daniel looked at each other and laughed. They hadn't gotten that far yet. We just got engaged 20 minutes ago, Sarah said. Well, start planning. I'm not getting any younger, and I want to see you two married before I die. You're not dying, Sarah said. Not today, but nobody lives forever. Now sit down and let me make you both some pie. This calls for celebration. They sat at the counter while Grace served them apple pie with ice cream, the same pie Sarah had eaten 1,000 times during her shifts. But tonight it tasted different, special. Like everything in her life had shifted just slightly, making the familiar feel new. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Daniel navigated the strange new territory of wedding planning. Sarah had never imagined getting married, had never let herself dream that far. She had no opinions about flowers or color schemes or any of the things that apparently went into a wedding. But Daniel's mother had opinions. Patricia had been planning Daniel's wedding in her head for years, waiting for the right woman. She had lists, vendors, ideas about venues that could accommodate 500 guests. 500? Sarah said weakly when Patricia presented her initial plans. They were sitting in Patricia's formal living room, surrounded by wedding magazines and vendor portfolios. The bank has a lot of important relationships, Patricia said. Clients, board members, political connections. They'll all expect invitations. Sarah looked to Daniel for help. He took her hand. Mom, we're not having that kind of wedding. Patricia set down her pen. What kind of wedding are you having? Small, Sarah said firmly. Intimate. Just the people who actually matter to us. But Daniel, your position. My position is CEO of a bank, not king of a country, Daniel interrupted. This is Sarah's day as much as it's mine. We're doing this our way. Patricia looked between them, reading the united front. She sighed. How small are we talking? 60 people, Sarah said. Maybe 70. Friends, family, people we actually want to celebrate with. And the venue? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the part Patricia really wasn't going to like. Grace's diner. Silence. Patricia's face went through several expressions before settling on carefully controlled disapproval. The diner. You want to get married in a diner? It's where we met, Sarah said. It's where I've spent the last 10 years of my life. It's home. Grace is the closest thing to family I have left. I can't imagine getting married anywhere else. Patricia looked at Daniel. And you're on board with this? Completely, Daniel said. The diner is important to Sarah. That makes it important to me. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. You know what? I think it's perfect. Unconventional, but perfect. It's you two, not trying to be something you're not. Sarah felt relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she needed Patricia's approval until she had it. Planning a wedding for a diner was easier than planning one for a traditional venue. No need for elaborate decorations when the space already had character. No need for expensive catering when Grace's cooking was better than any fancy wedding food. No need for a band when the old jukebox could play classic love songs. But there were still details to manage. Sarah juggled wedding planning with her coursework and her job at the diner. Some days she felt pulled in a dozen directions. Other days, everything clicked into place with surprising ease. Daniel helped where he could, but he was careful not to take over. This was Sarah's wedding as much as his. He deferred to her choices, supported her decisions, and only offered opinions when asked. 3 months before the wedding, Sarah finished her associate's degree. She walked across the stage at the community college commencement ceremony, wearing a rented cap and gown, and received her diploma with a 3.8 GPA. Daniel was in the audience, sitting next to Grace and Patricia. When Sarah's name was called, they stood and cheered loud enough to embarrass her. She didn't care. She walked back to her seat with tears streaming down her face, clutching the diploma like it might disappear if she let go. After the ceremony, Grace hugged her tight. I'm so proud of you, baby girl, so proud. I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah said. You let me adjust my schedule for classes. You encouraged me when I wanted to quit. You believed in me. I believed in you because you're worth believing in, Grace said. Now go celebrate. You earned this. They went to dinner at the Italian restaurant, the 4 of them, Sarah, Daniel, Grace, and Patricia, an unlikely family, bound together by love and respect rather than blood. Over pasta and wine, they toasted Sarah's achievement. What's next? Patricia asked. Are you transferring to a 4-year school? Sarah had been thinking about that question for weeks. I don't know. Part of me wants to keep going, get my bachelor's, but part of me wants to use what I've learned to do something practical. Like what? Daniel asked. I've been thinking about opening a restaurant. Not now, not yet. But someday. A place like Grace's, but my own. She glanced at Grace. If that's okay with you. I'm not trying to compete. Grace laughed. Baby girl, you're not competition, you're legacy. I've been doing this for 40 years. I won't be doing it forever. The idea of you carrying on the tradition, making it your own, that makes me happy. I don't have the money yet, Sarah admitted. Even with my savings, I'd need a lot more to start a restaurant. Then we plan for it, Daniel said. Figure out what it would take. Build toward it. You've already proven you can save for long-term goals. This is just a bigger goal. Sarah smiled. The idea felt less like a fantasy and more like a genuine possibility. Something she could work toward, something real. 2 months before the wedding, Grace's arthritis got significantly worse. She could barely grip a spatula anymore. Some mornings, she couldn't open her hands at all. The doctor prescribed stronger medication and suggested she consider retiring. Grace refused. I'll work until I can't work anymore. The diner is my life. But Sarah could see the pain in her mentor's face, see the way Grace moved more slowly, more carefully, see the exhaustion that came from fighting through pain every day. Sarah sat Grace down after a particularly difficult shift. Let me buy the diner. Grace stared at her. What? I have money saved. Not enough to buy it outright, but enough for a down payment. Daniel can co-sign a loan if needed. You can retire, get the medical care you need. And I can keep the diner running exactly as you built it. Sarah, you're not ready. I've been working here for 10 years. I'm assistant manager. I know every aspect of how this place runs. And Grace, you know I'll take care of it. You know I'll honor what you built. Grace's eyes filled with tears. This diner was supposed to be yours eventually anyway. I've been putting off the conversation because I wasn't ready to let go. So don't let go. Retire, but stay involved. Come in for breakfast with the regulars. Give me advice when I need it. Just stop working yourself into the ground. They negotiated for weeks. Grace wanted to give Sarah the diner. Sarah insisted on paying fair market value, or as close as she could manage. They compromised. Grace would sell to Sarah at a significantly reduced price, with a payment plan Sarah could afford. And Grace would stay on as a consultant for as long as she wanted. The paperwork was signed 1 month before the wedding. Sarah Chen became the owner of Grace's diner. The achievement felt surreal. 10 years ago, she had walked through these doors with nothing but grief and $2,000 to her name. Now she owned the place. Grace cried when they made it official. Your mama would be so proud. I'm so proud. Sarah cried too. Thank you for taking a chance on an 18-year-old who knew nothing. You knew everything that mattered, Grace said. You knew how to work hard and treat people right. That's all anyone needs. The wedding was 3 weeks away when Sarah's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Sarah Chen? Yes, who's calling? My name is Elizabeth Kim. I'm Mr. Kim's granddaughter. I'm calling about my grandfather. Sarah's heart sank. Mr. Kim, the elderly veteran who had come to the diner every morning for years. The first customer to congratulate her on her engagement. The man who had become like family. Is he okay? He's in the hospital. He had a stroke 3 days ago. He's been asking for you. Sarah was at the hospital within the hour. Mr. Kim looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and IV lines. But his eyes were alert when Sarah walked in. Sarah girl, he said, his voice weak but warm. You came. Of course I came. Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand. How are you feeling? Old, he said with a slight smile. Worn out, but better now that you're here. They talked for a while. Mr. Kim told stories about the war, about his late wife, about the life he had lived. Sarah listened, holding his hand, grateful for every word. I want to thank you, Mr. Kim said, for the past 10 years. Coming to the diner was the best part of my day. You always made me feel seen, feel valued. That matters more than you know. You matter to me, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. You and all the regulars, your family. I hear you're getting married, and you own the diner now. Your mother would be so proud. Everyone keeps saying that, Sarah said. I wish she could be here to see it. She is, Mr. Kim said with certainty. She sees everything, and she knows she raised a good woman. Mr. Kim passed away 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Sarah got the call from Elizabeth while she was working the morning shift. She hung up the phone and sat down in the back room and cried. Grace found her there. What happened? Mr. Kim died. Grace sat down beside her and put an arm around Sarah's shoulders. They sat in silence for a long time. The funeral was the week before the wedding. Sarah went, along with Daniel and several of the regulars from the diner. Elizabeth thanked Sarah for being there for her grandfather in his final years. "He talked about you all the time," Elizabeth said, "about the girl at the diner who remembered his order and asked about his day. You gave him a reason to get up every morning. That's a gift." Sarah thought about that as she and Daniel drove home from the funeral, about how small acts of kindness could matter so much, about how paying attention to people, really seeing them, could change lives. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. "I will be," Sarah said. "I'm just thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind. Mr. Kim lived 84 years, and what I'll remember most is how he made me feel, how he showed up every day with kindness and gratitude. That's not a small thing." "No," Daniel agreed. It's everything." The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze and clear blue skies. Grace's diner had been transformed overnight by volunteers. The regulars had come together to decorate, to clean, to make the space special. White lights were strung along the ceiling. Flowers from a local shop filled every available surface. Simple arrangements of daisies and roses. The booths had been pushed back to create space for chairs, 60 of them, arranged in neat rows facing the counter, where Sarah and Daniel would say their vows. Sarah got ready in the small apartment above the diner that had once housed Grace, back when Grace had lived and breathed the restaurant every moment. Patricia had hired a hairdresser and makeup artist, the one concession to tradition that Sarah had allowed. Her dress was simple, white, tea-length with cap sleeves and a sweetheart neckline. Not a designer gown, but beautiful in its simplicity. She had found it at a bridal boutique that specialized in affordable options. $500, which felt both extravagant and reasonable. Grace came up to the apartment while Sarah was getting ready. She wore a navy dress and carried a small box. "I have something for you," Grace said. Something borrowed and something old, all in one. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate necklace, silver with a small diamond pendant. "This was my mother's," Grace said. "She gave it to me when I got engaged to Henry. I never got to wear it at my wedding because that wedding never happened. But I'd be honored if you wore it at yours." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Grace, I can't. This is too important." "That's exactly why you should wear it. Someone should get to use it for what it was meant for, making a bride feel beautiful on her wedding day." Sarah let Grace fasten the necklace around her neck. The weight of it felt right, like a blessing. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything, for taking me in 10 years ago, for teaching me, for loving me like a daughter." "It was never a hardship," Grace said, her own eyes wet. "You were always easy to love." Downstairs, Daniel was in the kitchen area with his best man, his college roommate Marcus. Daniel wore a simple gray suit, tailored but not ostentatious. He looked nervous and happy in equal measure. The guests arrived gradually, the regulars from the diner, dressed in their Sunday best, Sarah's classmates from her business courses, Daniel's small circle of genuine friends, Patricia and Daniel's grandmother, Monica, who had become a close friend despite the awkwardness of how they reconnected, the bank's staff who had supported Daniel through the scandal. And in the front row, an empty seat with a photo of Mr. Kim in uniform, young and proud, a way to include him in the celebration. The ceremony started at 3 o'clock exactly. Sarah walked down the makeshift aisle alone, by choice. No one to give her away because she belonged to herself. Grace stood at the end, ordained online for this specific purpose, ready to officiate. Daniel's face when he saw Sarah walking toward him was something she would remember forever. Pure love and wonder and joy. Grace welcomed everyone with words that were simple and true. "We're here today because these two people found each other in the most unlikely way, and they fought like hell to keep each other. That's what love is. Not the easy beginning, but the hard middle. The choice to stay and do the work and build something real." Sarah and Daniel faced each other, holding hands, while Grace led them through the ceremony. When it came time for vows, they spoke from the heart, no scripts or rehearsed speeches. Daniel went first. "Sarah, you saved my life before you even knew me, and you've been saving me every day since. You taught me that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in connections, in showing up, in keeping promises, in building something that matters. I promise to see you every day for exactly who you are." to support your dreams, to do the hard work that real partnership requires, to be worthy of the gift of your love. Sarah took a shaky breath before speaking. Daniel, when we met, I was living in survival mode, getting through each day without letting myself hope for more. You made me brave enough to want something bigger, to believe I deserved happiness. I promise to stay brave, to keep growing, to communicate even when it's hard, to build a life with you that honors both of us, not just one. To love you not despite our differences, but because of them. Grace smiled through her tears. By the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Georgia, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, kiss your bride before I start crying too hard to see. They kissed while everyone cheered. The diner erupted in applause and whistles and joy. The reception was exactly what Sarah had wanted. No DJ, just the jukebox playing oldies. No formal dinner, just Grace's famous comfort food served buffet style. No elaborate cake, just pie from the diner's regular rotation. Apple, cherry, and pecan, served with coffee and ice cream. People mingled easily in the small space. The diner's intimacy forced interaction, broke down the normal barriers between different social circles. Daniel's wealthy friends chatted with construction workers from the morning shift. Patricia found common ground with Jenny, the single mom, comparing notes on raising children against odds. Sarah's favorite moment came during dinner. She was standing near the counter, watching Daniel talk with Grace, when she realized something. Everyone in this room had played a part in her journey. Everyone had contributed something to the person she had become. The regulars who had shown up every day treating her with respect and kindness. Grace, who had mentored her and believed in her. Patricia, who had learned to see past class differences. Monica, who had cared enough to tell her a difficult truth. Daniel, who had loved her enough to do the hard work of earning trust. She had built a community, a family, not through blood or obligation, but through consistency and care and showing up. Grace approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look happy, Mrs. Wright." Sarah tested out the name, Mrs. Wright. It felt strange but also right. "I am happy, happier than I ever thought possible." "You deserve it," Grace said firmly. "Every bit of it." They toasted, sipping champagne in the diner that had been witness to so much of Sarah's life, the place where she had learned to work hard, to serve others, to find dignity in labor, the place that was now hers to run and protect and pass on someday. The party lasted until midnight. People drifted away gradually, offering congratulations and well wishes. Finally, it was just Sarah and Daniel and Grace, sitting in a booth while the last wedding decorations came down. "Thank you for letting us do this here," Sarah said to Grace. "Are you kidding? This old place hasn't seen this much love in years. It was perfect." Grace stood, stifling a yawn. "Now get out of here. You're married people. You should be on your honeymoon, not sitting in a diner." Daniel and Sarah had decided against an elaborate honeymoon. Just a long weekend at a bed and breakfast in the mountains. Something simple and restorative. They would save the big trips for later, when Sarah had finished her degree and the diner was stable under her management. As they drove through the dark streets toward the bed and breakfast, Daniel reached over and took Sarah's hand. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly," Sarah answered. "You?" "More than I knew I could be." They spent the weekend hiking, reading, talking, and simply being together without the demands of work or school or daily life. It was quiet and perfect and exactly what they needed. When they returned to Atlanta, married life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah ran the diner with Grace's guidance, implementing small improvements while respecting the core of what made the place special. Daniel continued his work at the bank, but with better boundaries and more balance. They had dinner together most nights. They took walks. They dealt with the small conflicts that all couples face, using the communication tools they had learned in therapy. They were building a life, one day at a time. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah made a decision that had been brewing for months. She enrolled in a 4-year university business program, planning to work toward her bachelor's degree part-time while running the diner. It would take 3 years at the pace she could manage, but she had proven to herself that she could handle school and work simultaneously. The university accepted $45,000 from her savings account as payment for the first 2 years. Sarah watched the money leave her account with surprisingly little anxiety. This was what the money was for: building her future, investing in herself. She still had $30,000 in savings, still a cushion, still security. But now she understood that security wasn't just about accumulating money. It was about building skills, relationships, and opportunities. The degree would give her all of that. 1 year after the wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning, Sarah and Daniel sat at the counter in the diner during the slow period between breakfast and lunch. Sarah was reviewing vendor contracts. Daniel was reading a book Grace had recommended. The bell above the door chimed. A young woman walked in, looking uncertain. She was maybe 19, wearing worn clothes and carrying a backpack that seemed to contain everything she owned. She had the look Sarah recognized immediately. Someone alone and scared and trying to survive. Sarah approached with a menu and a smile. "Welcome to Grace's. Sit anywhere you like." The girl chose a booth in the corner. Sarah brought water and waited while she studied the menu with the careful attention of someone counting every dollar. "What's good here?" the girl asked. "Everything," Sarah said honestly. "But if you're on a budget, the breakfast special is the best deal. 2 eggs any style, bacon or sausage toast and hash browns for $7.95. The girl calculated in her head, then nodded. "I'll take that. Eggs over easy, bacon." Sarah put in the order and watched the girl from the corner of her eye. She saw herself at 18, lost and grieving and trying to figure out how to survive. An idea formed. When she brought the food, Sarah set down the plate and pulled out a chair. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" The girl looked surprised but nodded. "I'm Sarah. I own this place." "I'm Maya. First time in Atlanta?" "Yeah, just got here yesterday. Looking for work." Sarah made a decision. "We're hiring. If you're interested, it's diner work. Early hours, hard on your feet, dealing with all kinds of customers. But the tips are decent, and you'd get a free meal every shift." Maya's eyes widened. "Seriously? You'd hire me just like that?" "I'm a good judge of character," Sarah said. "And you remind me of someone." "Me, actually. About 10 years ago." She pulled a napkin and pen from her apron. "Here's my number. Think about it. If you want the job, call me tomorrow." Maya stared at the napkin like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone did it for me once. Gave me a chance when I needed one. Now I'm paying it forward." After Maya left, Daniel came over to where Sarah was refilling sugar dispensers. "That was a good thing you did," he said. "I don't know if she'll call. She might not want to work here." "She'll call," Daniel said with certainty. "And you'll train her the way Grace trained you. And someday, she'll own her own place and hire her own scared kid who needs a chance." Sarah smiled at the thought. That's the hope. 2 years after the wedding, Sarah earned her bachelor's degree in business management. She was 29 years old, owned a successful diner, had $25,000 in savings, and was married to a man who supported her dreams. The graduation ceremony was larger than the community college one. Sarah walked with hundreds of other graduates across a stage in a massive auditorium. But when her name was called, she heard Daniel and Grace and Patricia cheering just as loudly as they had before. After the ceremony, they celebrated at the diner, which had become the traditional location for Sarah's important moments. Grace made a special meal. Daniel gave a toast. Patricia shared stories about Daniel's graduation from business school years earlier. "I never imagined this," Sarah said, looking around the table. "Any of this. The degree, the dinner, the family I've built. 10 years ago, I had $2,000 and no plan beyond surviving the next day." "But you did survive," Grace pointed out. "And then you thrived. That takes strength, Sarah. Don't discount that." "Grace is right," Patricia added. "You've accomplished something remarkable. Not just the degree or the business ownership. You've built a life of integrity and purpose. That's rarer than you might think." Maya, who had indeed taken the job and was now Sarah's assistant manager, raised her glass. "To Sarah, for giving people chances and showing us what's possible." They drank to that, and Sarah felt the weight of gratitude settle over her. Gratitude for the journey, for the people who had helped her along the way, for the choices she had made, even the scary ones. 3 years after the wedding, Sarah and Daniel sat down with a business plan and a commercial real estate agent. Sarah was ready to open her second restaurant, not a diner this time, but something different. A small neighborhood bistro focusing on the kind of comfort food Grace had taught her to make, but elevated. Accessible pricing, but quality ingredients. She had saved enough for a down payment on a space. Daniel offered to invest as a business partner, And this time, Sarah accepted. She had learned that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. They found a location in a neighborhood that reminded Sarah of where she grew up. Working class, diverse, full of families who needed affordable places to eat. The space had been a failed restaurant, available for a fraction of what a new build would cost. Sarah named it Linda's Place after her mother, a way of honoring the woman whose small gift had started everything. The $2,000 that had grown into a life. The restaurant opened on a Saturday in October. The line wrapped around the block. People came because of Sarah's story, which had been featured in local news. They came back because the food was excellent and the prices were fair, and the atmosphere felt like home. Grace came to the opening, moving slowly now but still sharp as ever. She walked through the kitchen, inspecting everything with a critical eye. When she came out, she pulled Sarah aside. "Your mama would have loved this," Grace said. "Every bit of it. The name, the food, the way you've created a space where people feel valued. This is her legacy as much as yours." Sarah hugged her mentor tight. "Thank you for helping me get here." "You got yourself here," Grace corrected. "I just didn't let you give up." 5 years after the wedding, Sarah and Daniel sat in their living room going over finances. It had become a monthly ritual, reviewing investments, checking savings, planning for the future. Linda's Place had become profitable in its second year. The diner continued to thrive under Maya's day-to-day management, with Sarah overseeing both businesses. Daniel had fully transitioned to co-CEO arrangement at the bank, working fewer hours and focusing on initiatives that mattered to him personally. They had talked about having children, decided to wait a bit longer. Sarah wanted to get both restaurants stable first. Daniel supported whatever she decided. They had time. Sarah pulled up her savings account on her laptop. The balance had grown again despite the down payment on the restaurant. $68,000, built through the same discipline she had practiced for 15 years now. Automatic transfers, consistent saving, never touching it unless absolutely necessary. "You know what's wild?" Sarah said. "I have more saved now than I did when we met. Even after buying the diner, paying for school, investing in the restaurant, the compound interest keeps working." "That's the power of consistency," Daniel said, "and discipline. You've never stopped saving, never stopped building." Sarah thought about the girl she had been at 18, terrified and alone with $2,000. She thought about the years of struggle, the survival mode existence, the slow accumulation of small amounts that became large over time. "I want to start a scholarship," she said suddenly, "for students like I was, working class kids who want business degrees but can't afford it. We could fund it through the restaurant's profits. Not a huge amount, but enough to make a difference." Daniel smiled. "The Chen Scholarship for business students." Exactly. They researched what it would take, set aside initial funding, created criteria for applicants. By the end of the evening, they had the framework for something that would help young people the way Sarah had once needed help. 7 years after the wedding, Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 77. Sarah got the call in the early morning, the same call she had gotten about Mr. Kim years earlier. She sat in her kitchen and cried until Daniel woke and held her. The funeral was packed. Grace had touched hundreds of lives over 40 years of running the diner. The regulars came. Former employees came. People Grace had helped through hard times, given free meals to, offered advice to. They all came to pay respects to a woman who had made their world a little kinder. Sarah gave the eulogy. She talked about Grace's strength, her wisdom, her no-nonsense love. She talked about being an 18-year-old orphan who walked into a diner and found a mother. She talked about how Grace had taught her that family was something you built, not just something you were born into. "Grace Patterson lived the kind of life we should all aspire to," Sarah said, looking out at the crowded church. "She showed up every day, she worked hard, she treated people with dignity regardless of their station. She built something that mattered, and she loved fiercely, even when it would have been easier not to. That's her legacy. That's what she leaves behind." After the funeral, Sarah and Daniel and Maya stood outside the original diner, looking up at the sign, Grace's Diner. Sarah had thought about changing the name when she bought it, but Grace had insisted she keep it. "The name is part of the history," Grace had said. "Don't erase it, build on it." "We should keep the name," Maya said, echoing that conversation. "Grace's Diner, always. That's what this place is." Sarah nodded. "Always." 10 years after the wedding, Sarah Chen Wright stood at the counter of Grace's diner on a Tuesday morning, pouring coffee for the regulars. She was 39 years old, owner of 2 successful restaurants, holder of a bachelor's degree in business management, wife, mentor, survivor, builder. The Linda Chen Scholarship had helped 12 students so far. The restaurants employed 40 people total. The diner looked almost exactly as it had when Sarah first walked through the doors 20 years earlier, but better maintained, more loved. Her savings account held $92,000, grown steadily through 2 decades of discipline. She still set aside money every month, still lived below her means despite having more income than she once thought possible. Old habits persisted, but now they came from strength rather than fear. Daniel came in at 6:15, right on schedule. He still showed up most mornings when he was in town, still sat at the same stool, still ordered coffee and breakfast. 20 years into knowing each other, 10 years into marriage, and he still looked at Sarah like she was the most interesting person in the world. She poured his coffee without asking. "The usual, please." Sarah put in his order, then leaned against the counter. "I've been thinking." About? About opening a 3rd location in the neighborhood where I grew up, in Georgia. Full circle, you know? Daniel considered this. "That's a 3-hour drive from here. You'd have to hire strong management." "I know, but I think it's time. Time to bring what Grace taught me back to the place where it all started." "Then let's do it," Daniel said simply. "Let's build something there." Sarah smiled. 20 years ago, she had sat alone in a tiny apartment, staring at a bank statement, terrified she had been given money by mistake. 20 years ago, she had thought survival was the best she could hope for. Now she was building, creating, growing, and she was just getting started. The diner filled up with the morning rush. Sarah moved through the familiar routine, pouring coffee, taking orders, checking on customers. Maya handled the kitchen with the same efficiency Grace had once shown. Everything worked like a well-oiled machine. This was her life. Not perfect, but real. Built through consistency, discipline, and the courage to keep showing up even when it was hard. Built on a foundation of $2,000 and a mother's hope. Built with the help of people who had believed in her when she struggled to believe in herself. Sarah caught her reflection in the chrome coffee maker. She looked tired, but content. Older, but wiser. She looked like someone who had survived and then gone further, into thriving. Her mother would be proud, Grace would be proud, and most importantly, Sarah was proud of herself. That night, she would go home to Daniel. They would have dinner together, talk about their days, make plans for the future. Tomorrow, she would get up and do it all again. Show up at the diner, serve the regulars, manage the business, save a little money, build a little more. And somewhere, a scared kid would walk through the door looking for work. And Sarah would see herself in that kid and offer a chance, the way chances had been offered to her. That was how you change the world. Not through grand gestures or sudden windfalls, but through small, consistent choices, through showing up, through keeping promises to yourself, through building something real, one day at a time. Sarah Chen Wright had learned that lesson well, and she would spend the rest of her life teaching it to others.